There we go. We got it, Bob. Oh, hi. Sorry, we're running a little bit late. Excuse me a sec. Hey, Bob, make fast. Sorry, man. Welcome to Culture in Decline. My name is Peter Joseph. You know, this show is designed for those that want to be a little more skeptical about society, because perhaps you're like me, and as you stumble around this experiment we call global society, you can't help but feel an increasing sense of unease, perhaps even frustration, with respect to how we, the human family, have chosen to organize ourselves on this little planet. The late astronomer and well-known advocate of scientific thought, Carl Sagan, his famed PBS series Cosmos, once invited the question: if we were visited by a superior species from another part of the galaxy, and were forced to explain to them our stewardship of our planet, not to mention the state of human affairs today, would we be proud of what we described? How would we frame our explanation of how almost half of the world, over 3 billion people, are either barely surviving in abject poverty and sickness, or are simply dying off unnecessarily at a rate of about one person every couple of seconds, all occurring in the wake of an advanced technological reality where we could easily feed, clothe, and house every family on Earth in a respectable standard of living? How would we frame the global warfare, 230 million killed by their fellow man in the past 100 years alone? Based on what? Meaningless territoriality, resources, dogmatic, obsolete ideologies? Again, this all occurring in the shadows of a looming scientific recognition that we are indeed simply one family, sharing one household, bound by the exact same laws of nature, and hence the same unifying operational ideology. How about our economic system? The bedrock of what defines our society, not to mention our dominant motivations. How would we explain the reality that rather than organizing ourselves efficiently as a single system to properly manage this household we share, we childishly divide and compete and exploit each other through an archaic, completely environmentally decoupled game? A game, by the way, which not only appears to perpetuate a vast spectrum of social atrocities, but now seems to be further destabilizing society, decreasing our public health. Sorry to say, as an individual, I really don't care what you believe, nor do I particularly respect it. Why? Because I don't really respect what I believe either. There's no evidence to show that any of the traditional values, establishments, or social structures, common practices we have today will be relevant tomorrow. The only thing that appears to stand the test of time is this very notion of change, the ever-evolving understanding of ourselves and the world we inhabit. Perhaps some might think that that's actually the definition of human intelligence. What do you think about that? Less about what we know, more about how vulnerable we are. So when you look out your window, ask yourself, do you see intelligence or do you see dogma? Do you see a culture listening and working to realign itself with the ever-emerging natural orders as they unfold? Or do you see desperately stubborn efforts by many, particularly those in positions of power, trying to keep everything the same to the detriment of the entire human experiment? You know, like you, I might be only one member of this family that is now 7 billion strong. And like most families, yeah, sometimes it's hard for us to agree. But sometimes things get so bad, we need serious intervention. The following series is that intervention in the hope to salvage what is clearly a culture in decline. It's an election year in the United States, and some may say it's an election year for the whole world. Still the dominant empire, the United States political system has spent roughly $25 billion in the past decade alone. An amount of money, if averaged and distributed annually, could house and feed every homeless person in America, effectively ending the epidemic. Perhaps like me, by the end of this program, you'll find that money will be better well spent. Be that as it may, the 2012 presidential election is gearing up to be one of the most expensive and ostensibly important elections of all time, given the ongoing debt crisis, the unemployment crisis, and the vast destabilization we see across society. However, I'm not particularly interested in the left or the right, or am I interested in any candidate's political merit. What I'm interested in is the entire idea of global democracy in the tradition as it exists and how it is blindly accepted by the vast majority of people on this planet as being the only option to satisfy their interests and create good well-being and hence societal management in its optimum state. That's what interests me. So, rather than debate about who should be the next president, why don't we step back and consider some broader issues, such as, I don't know, maybe why we even have a president to begin with? What is this, medieval feudalism? I thought the days of kings, dictators, and giving one person enormous power was coming to an end. Or, more generally, doesn't it seem a little absurd to claim a participatory democracy when the public itself actually has zero say when it comes to the actual decisions made by those elected? It's bad enough that those voted in have literally no legal responsibility to do anything they might have claimed on the campaign trail, but if you examine history, you will find the historical fact that the public good has always been secondary to other interests, mainly financial and business interests. Of course, this is common knowledge now, right? I mean, why did the US government, completely against all known public interest, allow the private banking system, a system which actually creates nothing, to be bailed out to the tune of $13 trillion?
You have a $14 million oceanfront home in Florida. You have a summer vacation home in Sun Valley, Idaho. You and your wife have an art collection filled with million-dollar paintings.
While the public was left out to dry with overflowing private debt, job losses, and a stagnating economy. You know, if we're going to persist with this silly little game we've concocted called the growth economy, where the movement of money defines everything, it might be a good idea to do the math regarding what might actually help this economic system operate at some passable level.
Therefore, if you raise taxes on the so-called rich, you're really raising taxes on the job creators. And if the goal is private sector growth, you got to recognize that the best way to create that growth is to leave capital in the treasuries of the job creators.
If that money spent on the bank bailout was spent on, say, relieving private household debt instead, while letting Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and all of the other technically meaningless, non-producing financial institutions experience the failure and bankruptcy they deserved, simultaneously nationalizing the entire U.S. banking system as a whole, the U.S. economy might have had a chance. Why? Because banks don't actually contribute anything. People with jobs do. You want growth in this type of system, you need jobs. You want jobs, you need demand, and demand requires people having free money to spend. So by helping the public debt burden, you would plant the true seeds of economic growth. Well, of course, as obvious as that may seem, many forget one thing. The bailout had nothing to do with helping the U.S. economy, nor does it or will it work to help any hurting, sovereign economy in the world. Why? Because we live in a plutocracy, not a democracy, and the only true power is actually behind the curtain, not in front. The financial and business powers not only own and control this country, they own and control the whole planet. And no, it's not a conspiracy, it's a value system disorder. As long as a dollar sign is associated with every blade of grass, every plot of land, every fleeting thought or invention, not to mention judging the merit of individuals for their right to life through labor, we should expect nothing less. Since the inception of the state itself, coupled with the underlying power of money as the ultimate driver of human decisions and hence persuasion, the true power has always been financial. And those little people you elect into office every couple of years, they have owners too. And don't you forget it. Democracy, is that something you believe in as it exists today in America?
Well, when you say as in believe in, does it exist like forest fires or God or the devil?
What is your opinion of the American democratic system as it exists?
It's broken. It's deeply, deeply broken.
Democracy goes, of course, to Greece, and it's the theory that the people own the government. And is it in practice happening in 2012 in this country? Not close. It's a corporatocracy.
So all of this considered, let's now think a little more accurately about this whole democracy deal. Since the tradition of our democracy has to do with representatives elected to apparently do our thinking for us, a critical question becomes, where do these people come from? Why are they the ones on your TV and not others? Did you decide that these people are the best choices to compete for such critical leadership? Or have you noticed that the most pronounced candidates, especially the presidential, sort of come out of nowhere and through the media are given credence merely by repetition of exposure? The term democracy comes from the Greek demos, which means people, and krates, which means rule. And so the people of a given society express their opinions through votes, and policy is created by the majority's interest. It appears the process was formalized in ancient Greece and has been adapting ever since. However, it didn't take long for a bit of cynicism to emerge with respect to the process itself, given the fact that the entire basis of the idea assumes that the voting public actually is educated enough to know what they're doing. Franklin D. Roosevelt once acutely stated, "Democracy cannot succeed unless those who express their choice are prepared to choose wisely. The real safeguard of democracy, therefore, is education." Winston Churchill, on the other hand, was a little less forgiving, stating, "The best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter." And, of course, the infamous Mark Twain jumped to the inevitable punchline, stating, "If voting made any difference, they wouldn't let us do it." I would like you to ask yourself, if we were in the ruling class, the investment ownership class, to paraphrase Thorstein Veblen, and we wanted to preserve our interests against any interference, what would we do? Well, first we need to take the broadest possible view we can. We need to make sure the voting public is as uninformed as possible regarding relevant issues that might contradict our establishment's practices. Coupled with that, we also need to eliminate as much independent, logical, causal, scientific thought as possible. So, let's support an extremely underfunded, outdated, and deprived public educational system. A system focused on merely getting a person a job one day, not teach them how to critically and logically think. At the heart of democracy really is the basic assumption that the public is well educated about critical thought, they know how to think about things and evaluate, and therefore they can make proper decisions, right? What is your opinion on American education and hence its effect on the democratic process?
I think that, we have multiple problems in the education in America. One, I think we're dealing with the dumbing down of America.
And do you feel that this sort of poor educational system actually benefits the establishment?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Keep them stupid, keep them easily entertained. If they're uninformed, they can't fight back.
However, to further reinforce this, we also need to push and reward belief systems that support passive obedience. Belief systems and values that are stubborn, irrational, and promote closed thinking. Religion becomes super helpful in this circumstance.
Is it possible that religion is being politicized and that candidates are using it as a tool?
I believe that God created the universe.
And we're enjoined by Scripture and the Lord Jesus to oppose it with all our might.
Let us not pray that God is on our side in a war or any other time, but let us pray that we are on God's side.
May God bless the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
I thank the God who loves us, the God who gave us life, who gave us our being.
And so to every sailor, soldier, airman, and Marine who's involved in this mission, let me say, you're doing God's work.
If people are groomed to be obedient and follow blindly, they are ripe to extend that obedience to others who claim authority. Check. Next, it's critical we recognize a unique sociological characteristic of the human condition, something we will call herd psychology. This is the tendency for us humans when faced with mass appeal to often behave in extremely thoughtless and malleable ways. In the words of Charles Mackay, famed author of Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, men, it has been said, think in herds. It will be seen that they go mad in herds, while they only recover their senses slowly and one by one. However, this doesn't just apply to, say, a soccer riot. Such mob persuasion can be generated through simply shared cultural events. Remember September 11th? Talk about mass insanity. This event created an immediate crowd madness with fear and revenge. And it didn't take long for the U.S. government, and other governments in fact, to harness that madness and funnel support for draconian legislation and illegal invasions. However, this herd psychological tendency is not only very useful for implanting and guiding perceived issues of importance, it is also critical in setting rigid limits of debate, creating the tendency for those who begin to question beyond those limits to be ostracized and rejected by the herd itself. You know, if someone talks about a more equitable distribution of income in society,
all the growth that has occurred in our country over the last decade or more has gone to the upper 1-2%.
Fucking communists. If someone speculates about the obvious power manipulation and corruption, God damn it, I am so sick of these conspiracy theorists and their lies. The Federal Reserve does not collude for its own self-interest. And heaven forbid we get those do-gooders who want to actually apply modern scientific knowledge and improve society with it. Yeah, right. Feed, clothe, and house everybody on Earth with technology? Utopian jackasses. Remember, probably the greatest way to control human thought is to establish a deep fear of social rejection and associate that fear to culturally taboo subjects. So, that groundwork in motion, we now have to deal with the pesky problem that the public just might wise up enough and work to maneuver a person into political power that will cause us problems. Therefore, some more specific structural safeguards are in order. Basically, we need to make sure those unwanted candidates are unable to get anywhere near the major outlets for public digestion. And if they do, the practice is to treat them like freaks.
Are you suggesting that heroin and prostitution are an exercise of liberty?
What you're inferring is, you know what? If we legalize heroin tomorrow, everybody's going to use heroin. How many people here would use heroin if it was legal?
How do we do that? With money. And our corporate constituency has plenty. We just need to make sure the use of this money for political influence goes uninhibited. In a U.S. Supreme Court 1976 decision, the freedom for a candidate to use unlimited personal money for their campaign was deemed legal, equating spending money with the right of free speech, in fact. What this translates to, in effect, is the removal of any regulated fairness of expression, and hence whoever has the most money has the most resources and hence effect. Perfect. However, let's secure this a little bit farther. Let's also make sure that our corporations are given the legal right to promote our little puppets without limit. Luckily, in 2010, our pals again at the U.S. Supreme Court confirmed that the government may not restrict political spending by any corporation in candidate elections, as they are, once again, protected by the First Amendment. So now we can buy mad ad space to promote whoever we want as much as we want, drowning the opposition in the media. And double check. Okay. Now, those broad measures in place, it is still important to control the basic unfolding of the electoral process from start to finish. The best way to do this is to create a false duality, the illusion of competition between parties. We need a two-party system that constantly argues with each other in general, but still upholds the basic elitist policies we need to maintain our advantage. The beauty of this dominant two-party farce is that it not only gives the public the needed illusion of choice, it more importantly oppresses those upstart third parties. As we know, these annoying self-righteous third parties have been troublemakers from day one. The civil rights amendments, women's suffrage, broad worker rights, child labor laws, and other agitations for industry all came from these rising third parties historically, not from the dominant established group, us. So we need to be vigilant here. We need to get the public so used to this two-party dictatorship that they don't even mind if the two parties are given direct control over most of the electoral process itself. They need to have the power of organizing the rules of electoral redistricting, the primaries, the caucuses and debates, and of course we, the ruling class, will moderate their actions through lobbying, campaign contributions, exactly what the free market promises. the freedom to manipulate everything. So meet our friends, the Commission on Presidential Debates, or CPD. In 1988, the Democratic and Republican parties, or the Demo-Publicans as I like to call them, established the Commission on Presidential Debates. Posing as a nonpartisan institution, the CPD successfully took control of the most influential election event, the presidential debates. The CPD, which is a private corporation co-chaired by the former heads of the Republican and Democratic parties, decide through secret contracts who is going to participate in the debates and what is going to be talked about. So those pesky third parties, along with controversial ideas, can only come into play if the Demo-Publicans decide they can. I mean, really, can you imagine what would happen if those annoying social upstarts actually were able to go up against the trite, miserable logic and narrow subject matter typical of our rigged debates?
But for the nurse, the teacher, the police officer who, frankly, at the end of each month, they've got a little financial crisis going on. They're having to take out extra debt just to make their mortgage payments. We haven't been paying attention to them. And if you look at our tax policies, it's a classic example.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. President, but I couldn't agree more. However, don't you feel that the tax policies and other common acknowledgments about what is hurting the average American is actually quite benign when compared to the very foundation of our economic system? You know, making money out of debt, charging interest on it that doesn't exist, which means that there is always more outstanding debt than there is money to pay for it. Of course, that lends itself to more debt being created to cover it, and essentially failure and bankruptcy is inevitable. Not for the upper classes as much as the lower middle classes, of course. Why? Because the lower classes are the ones taking the loans for their home and their car, while the upper class are actually making interest income. Rather than paying interest, they actually make interest through their deposits and investments. Obviously, this secures a massive growing class divide structurally. Is that not something worth considering? No? Oh, and as a final point about the CPD, our corporations can now directly donate to them, hence the parties, imposing our financial influence and hence agenda even more, making another end run around that pesky legal legislation barring corporations from contributing directly to political campaigns. A beautiful end run. However, nothing's perfect and you can't be too careful, and sometimes good old-fashioned time-tested tactics are needed, and nothing is as old-fashioned as good old direct electoral fraud. So let's get some of our corporate buddies to build some voting machines with really terrible integrity and get them in as many critical spots as we can. Yeah, I know it's sloppy. It has already become public that the machines can be hacked remotely with about $10 in materials and an 8th grade science education. But since most Americans are completely distracted by their debt, lowering standard of living, and ongoing job losses, the liberal media falls on deaf ears. So, let's recap. Free-thinking people tend to recognize the need for ongoing adaptation and change. So we need to make sure education supports the existing tradition through mere rote learning, not critical, logical thought. Next, we establish clear limits of debate in the culture and make sure those who go beyond the pale are shut down by endless ridicule and debasement. Then we need to harness the herd psychology and guide it through our media to either identify with the issues we need in the forefront or distract them outright. As far as large-scale influence, we need to have the freedom to do whatever we want and to use our vast corporate wealth to influence both public opinion and the candidates themselves. Our legal status as a corporate person now ensures our free speech and hence free spending. Next, we create the public illusion of competition and choice and gain as much control over the election process as possible. Our Demo-Publican pawns, with our endless sponsorship and lobbying, now handles this well, including the restriction of public debate and the denial of all interfering third parties. And if that wasn't enough, screw it. We'll just reorder the ballot counts ourselves with the black box voting hacks. in the most influential electoral states. And so it goes. You know, since the beginning of civilization, those in power have successfully restricted the interests of the majority by regulating their values, by controlling resources through money, not to mention controlling the very processes that exist to challenge them. Is it a conspiracy? Do such powerful men meet in dark rooms and work to figure out how to keep their power? Actually, no, not as much as you might think. You see, the hilarious thing about all of this is that such a process of manipulation is actually self-generating, justified in a step-by-step manner, with basic self-interest guiding the whole way. You see, the real corruption is not occurring in backroom meetings or at the docks. The real power resides in how you, the public, actually perpetuate, condone, and support the very underlying systems that oppress you. Final thoughts. Many watching this program's content will likely interpret the broad farce known as American democracy, or really the farce of global democracy, in fact, as a system in need of better regulation. The ACLU, Democracy Now!, Michael Moore, Occupy Wall Street, Annie Leonard, and other intelligent and outspoken activist institutions and figures seeking what they call change all actually operate within the same presupposition. If only we can better regulate monetary and corporate power, we can fix the world. No. I'm sorry to say that until the social premise itself, and hence the fundamental psychological drivers of our economy, imbalance, scarcity, narrow self-interest, exploitation, and competition, until those are altered to the extent that the system begins to reward and reinforce collaboration, human and ecological balance, efficiency, and sustainability, nothing is going to really change. In a sociological condition where everything is based on advantage over others, what we call corruption today isn't actually corruption at all. It's just business as usual. I mean, seriously, what did you people expect? In an economy where everything is for sale by the very ethic inherent, underscored by the false notion that we can't possibly work together intelligently to benefit all, no level of supposed corruption should surprise any of us. So, in short, to assume we're going to perpetuate this economic philosophy here and then contradict it over here with the idea that certain elements of society should be off limits from monetary manipulation and gain is completely naive and absurd. But don't take my word for it. Just sit back and watch the ebb and flow as we move from one set of corrupt, damaging practices to the next. Sure, we'll slowly fix a few issues with our in-the-box thinking, but until the whole system is addressed at its core, unfortunately, it's all mostly a waste of time, and improvement will be very, very little. And until we grow up to that level, sit back, relax, enjoy the show, and until next time, I'm Peter Joseph, an agent and victim of a culture in decline.
We want level take, not corporate tyranny.
Modest preemptive actions can obviate the need of more drastic actions at a later date.
I think that you've been taught things like confidence intervals in an elementary statistical course that would let you do this, but if you really studied carefully, you'd know that they don't let you do this. A really principled frequentist can't produce a probability distribution.
The conclusion we want to point out when we think about valuation is the fact that means are scarce. I alluded to this already, that As finite beings, we can't will our ends to be attained.
Statistical description of the government's net of interest surplus.
Deflation, they think that yields could drop to, say, less than 1% on the 10 years and less than 2% on the 30 years.
That would effectively be a takeover of monetary policy by the Congress.
Daunting, right? Might even make you feel stupid. Perhaps it's no wonder then, while even with the ongoing economic failures across the world, inequality, increasing poverty, debt collapse, bank failures, unemployment rising, very few today seem to be able to understand, let alone discuss, modern economics. Outside, of course, the delegation game, where the only attempt at solutions people know is the mere shifting around of the deck chairs on the Titanic, assuming some new politician, central bank policy, or corporate legislation is going to save the day. Well, some years back, after coming to the conclusion that our politicians, legislators, and established authorities just might be provably incompetent when it comes to the truly intelligent management of our society, I started to look for questions and answers on my own. Asking those questions about things that many today either seem to take for granted, ignore, or even worse, assume that they have no capacity or business investigating at all, since our credentialed authorities in control must be smarter, more informed. It's a sad staple of modern culture, you know, the old relax, turn on the TV, keep going into debt, and pump out a bunch of kids while you're at it, but most importantly, keep showing up at those jobs, which you have likely already fooled yourself into believing serve some legitimate social role. Remember, the 1% of the world that owns 40% of the planet's wealth did not get that way with you understanding how the world really works. Nevertheless, and such cynicism aside, I decided that I needed to start again, if you will, and ask some fundamental questions about stuff most simply have written off and forgotten. If you were to take a poll today of our species, asking what truly are the most fundamental questions that pertain to human survival and prosperity, such as, what really supports human life, how food grows, what energy is, what creates and reinforces good public health, what defines a useful or detrimental belief system, you can rest assured that the vast majority would have more concrete answers about baseball statistics, fashion trends, sitcom plots, and religious scriptures. Not to demean the cultural pleasures and creativity of expression that creates enjoyment in this life, but we have a distortion of priority that has proven incredibly detrimental to the future of our sustainability on this planet, where the majority facing clear mounting problems not only doesn't understand what the root of such problems really are, they don't even know what questions to ask. And today there is no greater destructive ignorance at hand than the vastly delusional concept known as modern economics. And it is in this fundamental context that I found the most interest. So what is an economy? Where does its foundational premise come from? What are we relating to exactly? How is societal organization finding a benchmark for itself? Is there a benchmark? What are we doing? And why does the discussion of this subject appear to be so elitist in its vocabulary and orientation? Is it really that complicated? Well, I became so tired of being called ignorant of the subject by self-proclaimed experts I challenged, I decided to take it upon myself to read the entire macroeconomics curriculum of Harvard University from the undergraduate to the PhD level, along with all the staples of influence, F.A. Hayek, John Maynard Keynes, Ludwig von Mises. And I'll tell you what, I'm really glad I did, because I had some very poor judgments that needed correction. Not so much regarding my views about economics, but that life is short, and I wasted an enormous, unforgivable amount of time reading this outdated, overly intellectualized gibberish. Shit. Bob, would you take care of that, please? The fuse panel. Be careful, man, it's not grounded. As the following episode will detail, modern economics is not true economics at all. It's a mere ideological philosophy built upon a series of presuppositions that have been given the illusion of permanence. There is absolutely no relationship to the scientific integrity of our knowledge of the environment built into this model. The monetary market system of religious belief is at the core of the vast majority of ecological and social imbalance we see in the world today. Sadly, it is in the face of normality, so many look past it. We might begin to see that this principal notion and practice is truly a problem in society, and to me, it is at the heart of a culture in decline. Earth. Curious little ball of rock, gas, and water, isn't it? Hard to believe this little bubble of chemical elements floating in space, basically powered by the sun, could give rise to our colorful yet rather troubling super monkey species. A species often appearing pretty serious in its interest to destroy its habitat. Though I should say, pretty serious in its interest to destroy itself.
What is democracy?
It's got something to do with young men killing each other, I believe.
Excuse me a second. Bob, what the hell was that? The cutaway. It wasn't funny, it was just depressing. Couldn't you have found some guy shooting a bottle rocket out of his ass or something? I mean, you know what our demographic is and the point of this show, right? Okay, well, please. Anyway, perhaps our immaturity is just a phase, a tragically comedic rite of passage. No different than children that need to be burned by a hot stove in order to realize they shouldn't touch it, or what the physics behind it may be. Nevertheless, the history and characteristics of this little orb can be scientifically described with a good deal of accuracy. A couple billion years old now, a composite of gas and dust that resulted mostly from a large chemical reaction long ago, likely an exploding star or supernova. And over millions of years, this dust clustered into relatively big chunks of rock, a pronounced gravitational field emerged, our chemical elements were slowly reorganized, and conditions emerged to enable water and an atmosphere, which is what bred the first single-celled organisms. And so went the slow process of mutation into the very amusing circumstance we have today, us. Of course, you're free to believe whatever creation story you like, a rib from Adam, alien cross-pollination, primordial ooze. At the end of the day, the utility of such knowledge is quite small, and in fact, our little monkey brains might never have a complete picture of something so complex. Yet what we do know is that the universe is governed by laws, not moral or religious laws, but laws that were around long before we ever evolved a brain to understand them. Laws that very clearly point out that we either adapt to them and respect them, or we suffer the consequences. Such is the true face of God, the laws of nature. In many ways, the history of our universe is the history of our understanding of it, and we have come a long way as a species with respect to how we organize our lives around these rules. And likely the best example of this adaptation, or in many ways lack thereof, is how we think about economy, the foundation of our social survival. Many thousands of years ago, our super monkey brethren began to discover how to engage nature. We went from being completely at the mercy of the habitat, gathering our food with some hunting, living and migrating around the natural seasonal regeneration, to an agricultural revolution, learning how to cultivate food, create ever-sophisticated tools to ease labor, and, in effect, learn how to mimic nature itself. In fact, this new awareness and ever-increasing understanding to harness the processes of nature to our advantage is what has led to the vast technological innovation we see today. If nature is doing something, odds are we can understand how through these dynamic scientific principles. From artificial intelligence today, which works to emulate actual neurological processes, to molecular engineering, which uses the atomic logic to manually recreate material objects, to those now ever-important blood-shifting erectile dysfunction drugs, which, if you've been watching TV recently, must be the most epidemic health crisis in the Western world today. Since this revolution, human society became less nomadic, slowly merging into cities, and systems of labor specialization began to rise, along with means for exchange. Barter is a common example. You need some eggs? Maybe give some firewood you chopped up in exchange for the dairy farmer's work. Yet, such practices became cumbersome and impractical after a while, so the idea of using some rare, fancy rocks, like gold and silver, as a medium of exchange eased these transactions through a system of pricing goods in terms of their relative value. This gave birth to what we know today as the adjustable price system, which, through the public's aggregate patterns of exchange and production, creates a crude yet semi-workable logic where the prices of goods reflect the balance of supply and demand, otherwise known as the market or market value. Let me explain. When you stumble into the mall and buy the 85th generation iPoop 4G MP3 colostomy bag camera phone waffle maker, you are creating economic signal information that is used to calculate demand, local and regional preferences, and other resulting data in concert with the millions of other impulsive consumers who, having also likely bought the 84th generation just 2 months prior for twice the price, creates an aggregate flow of input data and feedback that allows for an ostensibly rational regulation of resource allocation, production, distribution, labor requirements, and of course price consensus in the market based on perceived supply and demand. Not to mention the general data of how the marketing team can screw you over even more later on. This mechanism is partly what the ultimate high priest of our current economic religion, Adam Smith, was alluding to with his invisible hand notion of causality in the free market. And in many ways, he was onto something. It does work in a limited context in a crude way. In fact, in the 1920s, an economist named Ludwig von Mises put forward the still high-standing claim that without the price mechanism, economic calculation and rational resource allocation and general organization would be impossible. He called it the economic calculation problem. However, things are much different today than they were 200 years ago when Adam Smith published his Wealth of Nations or when Ludwig von Mises made his criticism of central planning. The fact is, the argument has changed. The economic debate now is what is actually sustainable and progressive for the human species, not the mere mechanics of the movement of money. While it is true the price system might allow for the basic calculation of supply and demand data to help rationally allocate labor, preference, distribution, and the like, it ignores the real operational factors that relate to true, efficient, earthly management, hence the true definition of economy, which is optimized efficiency on all levels. For instance, there is no consideration for optimum resource allocation based on the material's most efficient purpose. Rational allocation of resources is not rational if the most conducive use of those natural materials scientifically is not directly considered and brought into comparison. There is no consideration for the organizational efficiency of technical production itself. And all you have to do is analyze the waste machine of globalization to see this insanity at work. There is also no consideration for regeneration needs or recycling protocols, a true requirement for responsible, rational resource use on a finite planet. Nor is there any true production or distribution efficiency in any optimized scientific sense, as such a means is, as will be described more so in a moment, also counter to the inherent logic of the market system itself. These, coupled with many other serious parameters needed for a truly efficient economy, are simply ignored, or even worse, assumed to be inherent to the price mechanism's function when they clearly are not. You see, the price mechanism's concept of efficiency translates the subjective mass interaction of consumers into the narrow assessments of regional demand, production, and distribution. It has nothing to do with how or why the methods of industry are what they are. Such factors are left up to the whim of the producers, operating for profit alone, completely decoupling from the natural regulation of scientific principles of sustainability. Oh man! You see, at the core of the economic calculation problem is really the argument that we are completely irrational, that we can't possibly be organized in a way that is structurally efficient. We're too insane, essentially. Therefore, we have to have a general economic anarchy to organize our society, and there's no other way around it. Bullshit! Again, today is very different than it was prior, and a quick review of modern computer programming and systems engineering will tell you that not only can the algorithmic intelligence of our sensory and measurement technology today, coupled with synergistic computer calculation, orient all the previously existing factors taken into account by the price mechanism as we know it, the truly relevant yet missing factors for optimum efficiency and sustainability could be brought into the equation. This would be the making of a true economic calculation for industry, not the crude, truncated data put forward by price alone. So coming back to our household, the Earth, what is this thing really? It's a system. It's a system of symbiotic laws. And at the core of all principles of sustainability is recognition of the largest order system we can find. For reference, the price mechanism on... Bob, what was that? Jesus Christ, Louis. Bob, why didn't you tell me Louis was here already? Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special guest here on Culture and Decline, our local guru, Louis the Logic Gremlin. Louis has a severe impatience for anything illogical, and he works to... Okay, Bob, you gotta get the goddamn demo publican back in his cage or Louis is gonna freak out. Shit. Cut the camera. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. As I mentioned, Louis here gets a little frustrated when it comes to anything illogical, and the demo publican is sort of his mortal enemy. Anyway, Louis, since we have you here, I want to ask you a few questions. Is the free market actually a good basis for sustainability for the human species? Okay, yeah. Well, what about infinite wants and human needs? How do we calculate such complexity? Well, thank you very much, Louis. Appreciate that. Well, there you have it, folks. However, logic aside, opinions about our economic system range dramatically. So to gain some public consensus on the issue, we now go live to our New York Culture and Decline correspondent, Big Scotty D, who's live on Wall Street.
Thank you, Peter. This is Scotty D in front of the New York Stock Exchange. Today we're here in New York City just to try to talk to some people on the street and find out a little bit about what's going on in the world perception of economics.
Culture and Decline's man on the street.
Sir, do you want to talk about the economy? Would you like to talk about the economy? Would you like to talk about the economy?
I really suck at this, but I don't think people want to talk about the economy either.
I just walked to my supermarket. He told me you can do that here.
Oh. However, there was one guy who was willing to talk to me. What do you feel is the definition of economics? Standing here in front of Wall Street, I'm just curious, what do you think economics is?
Well, I would say that economics is really it's just based on money, the things that go on from over here by Wall Street. It's just money that makes the system, generate throughout New York City or wherever in the world. But it's just mainly a money thing which make the world go around.
I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, what is this guy talking about? But in reality, he probably knows as much about economics as I know about interviewing people on the street. And it seems like most of us really don't know what the economy is all about anyway. Back to you, Peter.
Man on the street.
Is it me, or have you noticed that there is more for sale in the world than ever before? And I'm not referring to goods in your local store. Today, the market rationale is that everything is for sale and nothing is sacred. Need some cash? Why don't you rent out your forehead to commercial advertising? Or better yet, why don't you buy the life insurance policy of your elderly neighbor, and when she dies, you can get a nice payout. Yup, it's legal. Or maybe it's the little things that make you happy. So rather than put that blow-up doll in your car to use the carpool lane, just buy it like you can in Minneapolis. Or maybe you have an itch to slaughter that endangered black rhino in Africa. Well, you can. Costs you about $150,000, but hey, it's there. 150, boy, I can't wait to eat that rhino. Or more seriously, maybe your kids are not excelling well at school. Well, the market has a solution. Pay them. Pay them to read and get good grades, like they do in Dallas, Texas. But perhaps that's overkill, because by the time they hit college age, most prestigious universities will look the other way for admission once a nice hefty donation is made for that new library wing. Want to serve your country but are tired of all those pesky UN war rules and poor pay? Just join the growing legion of private military contractors who are slowly replacing the U.S. military in general. Or how about love? Need a date but don't want to wade through all the fog? Women will now go on dates with the highest bidder on some dating sites. Forget chatting, just fork out a couple $100 to entice the woman of your choice to allow you to pay for her dinner. I'm sure it will be a long-lasting relationship. Or perhaps most important, does your business need a law passed to secure profits? Well, just hire a lobbyist to influence Congress. As the prior episode of Culture in Decline denoted, there is nothing in the political and legal spectrum that is not clearly for sale. In fact, why do you think the court system allows most offenses to be cleared with monetary fines? But even if you do something really bad and you're stuck in jail, don't fret, because in some cases you can pay about $80 a night for a nice upgrade to a clean, quiet jail cell in the nice area of the prison. You name it, you can buy it, and nothing is sacred. 143 years after the passage of the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and 60 years after Article 4 of the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights banned slavery and the slave trade worldwide, there are today more slaves than any time in human history, trafficking about 30 million for various profit schemes. But what about ethics, you might ask? Well, what about it? Ethics and morality continue to be redefined by the economic ethos of the day, and when a Wall Street trader makes millions of dollars betting against the currency and hence prosperity of another country, I can assure you he is sleeping like a baby at night. And why shouldn't he? He is simply doing what is rewarded and reinforced by the economic system at large. You see, the market's inherent psychology has nothing to do with anything except its own perpetuation. When you hear politicians tell you that they are invading some poor country to bring freedom and democracy, you need to understand what those words really imply. The freedom they bring is market freedom, and the democracy they bring is the democracy of purchasing power, the freedom of using money for influence, the freedom to, in fact, restrict the freedom of others. However, let's get back to this technical stuff. Putting aside the distortion of market rationale that now puts everything for sale, putting aside the false premise that the price mechanism actually properly calculates the true attributes of a sustainable and efficient economic practice, and putting aside the basic value system disorder radiating out of the overall basis of unfolding, let's now take a little quiz. Welcome to Modern Economics 101. Question 1. If you lived on a planet with finite resources and an expanding population, would you encourage an economy based on the need for growth and consumption to keep everything going? Correct answer? No. The fact that our economy literally requires constant consumption and growth to keep GDP afloat and people employed is the hallmark of not an economy, but an anti-economy. Question 2. If you were a producer, Would you make goods to be as durable and adaptable as possible given the finite nature of resources and an interest to maximize labor productivity? Answer, yes. Today, it's the opposite, and not only are all goods inferior the moment they are made due to the cost efficiency needs for corporations to remain competitive, most companies also engage in what is called planned obsolescence, which deliberately reduces good quality to encourage repeat purchases for more profit. Question 3. If you were a socioeconomic planner, would you encourage everyone to buy one of everything, hoarding that personal property protectively, even though many goods are used infrequently? Answer, no, that would be inefficient. The reality that goods are only as relevant as their use would be realized, and hence a system of shared access, not blind restrictive universal ownership, would be the most rational manner of unfolding. Question 4. What about incentive? Would you push a cutthroat competitive environment where everyone is out for themselves or their little group? Correct answer, no. Knowing what we know today about the competitive mentality and how it creates abuse, along with the reality that collaboration and the sharing of information is truly the driver of progress on the social level, competition would be seen as the most limiting of arrangements as a philosophical practice. And question 5. What would be the basis for reward today? Would you require every human to submit to each other for labor as to achieve the means for survival? No, that would be crude and counterproductive given the state of technology. Modern technical capacity has the ability to increase productivity beyond anything known in human history, not to mention secure more safety and efficiency in general. To push human labor for income in the face of this tool for vast improvement is just absurd. Final thoughts. If we were to take a step back and reflect upon how our human family is behaving across the world today, from Western materialism to Islamic extremism, from nuclear war to necrophilia, we are faced with a dark yet extremely entertaining reality. The very real fact that we are monkeys in the wild, barely out of the jungle on this planet, in the words of the late great George Carlin, inching out of the dark ages, in fact, from a period of deep fear and confusion with respect to who we are, what we're doing, how we relate to each other, not to mention how we relate to the habitat that spawned us. On one side of the spectrum, we have a vast spectacle of human conceit, stubborn ignorance, so much so that if you're like me, sometimes you wonder why we should try it all. That maybe this species deserves everything it gets, and its fate as an evolutionary cul-de-sac, a failed genetic mutation, might be an ideal hope for this universe. Cynicism aside, however, it's easy to see that there is a growing change in the minority which will slowly become majority if we let it. An awakening is happening, an awakening where people have stopped imposing their traditional ideals and various ideological baggage on the world and instead are starting to listening to what the tools of our ingenuity has afforded us, listening to the message of nature itself. And if there is any context which needs a serious intervention with respect to the natural laws that govern us, if there is any context where we need to simply pay attention, prepared to drop all of our prior assumptions and change accordingly, it is in the economic context. Economics is not just some arbitrary abstraction for processing and distributing resources. It is an underlying value molder that programs us into modes of behavior that extend into all areas of our psychology. It is the active global religion, whether people like it or not. And for those of us that wish to see reason triumph over dogma, we have a long, long road ahead. Advocates of the free market model of economics will tell you that there is no other system possible to calculate society, that the competitive basis is the only way to incentivize our primitive culture. They will tell you that reduced economic interference of government is the key to preserving the true integrity of the market economy and also preserve our so-called liberty, which they say would be quickly corrupted as tyranny and oppression must occur if any type of collaborative, designed economic practice was applied. They talk of the true free market a utopian ideal that claims the invisible hand, if allowed to run without interference, would alleviate the poverty, deprivation, abuse, corruption, conflict, and inefficiency so common in the world today. Well, as with all religions, delusion is common. Because today the market is actually more free than ever, with the state being nothing more than a parent corporation working to assist its commercial subsidiaries which support it. Everything is for sale and no one is accountable. All natural laws and physical realities that would comprise the basis for true technical, earthly efficiency and awareness and reasoning that, if allowed, could literally transform the world into a place of vast abundance and prosperity never before seen, have been buried and dismissed, only to be overshadowed by a certain kind of efficiency, market efficiency, an efficiency that tracks money and money alone, an efficiency that is literally decoupled from everything that supports and secures life itself, an efficiency that is circular in its reasoning as it has no recognition of the physical laws of nature. The laws of nature, which are in fact the only real true government and regulatory system that has or will ever exist. But then again, who is to say it matters? Maybe we should all just take it in stride. Maybe this reality show of humankind, this satirical, tragic parody of itself, to be sure, doing all it knows, maybe this is the way it is, and our brains, our genes are messed up, and we're just waiting for the final laugh track when Spaceship Earth slams into that psychological brick wall. I guess time will tell. And until then, sit back, grab some popcorn, and keep watching the greatest reality show of all time. And until next time, I'm Peter Joseph, an agent and victim of a culture in decline.
Would you like to talk about the economy?
Oh, hello. Hey, tell me honestly, do these pants make my ass look too big? Or wait, maybe not big enough. Is it time for a little butt cheek augmentation? Or maybe a little liposuction to take away these love handles at least. And perhaps while I'm at it, a nice tummy tuck. You know, that can't hurt to even it all out. But wait, why should I stop there? Since I'm a bit too lazy to work on these pecs, perhaps some implants might be in order. Along with a nice minor neck lift. Of course, I'm definitely going to have to do something about this male pattern baldness, right? What's that? An eyebrow lift? No, I don't know if I want to look all alert all the time. Rather, I think I'm going to finish off with a plethora of Botox injections that tighten up these wrinkles. You know, Botox, that chemical neurotoxin that temporarily paralyzes your nerves for the illusion of youthfulness. Marshall McLuhan once said that the last thing a fish would ever notice in its habitat is the water. Likewise, the most obvious and powerful realities of our human culture seem to also be the most unrecognized. And it is only when we take pause, often at the risk of social alienation, to question the foundational principles and ideas to which our lives are oriented, does a dark truth about our supposed normality become more clear. Today we live in an ocean with enormous waves of status obsession, materialism, vanity, ego, and consumerism. Our very lives have become defined not by our productive thoughts, social contributions, and goodwill, but by a superficial, delusional set of associations where the very fabric of our society now radiates with cheap romanticisms connected to vain competition, conspicuous consumption, and neurotic addictions, often related to physical beauty, status, and superficial wealth. In effect, social conformity masquerading as individualism, with the virtues of balance, intelligence, peace, public health, and true creativity left to rot on the sidelines. The cultural water we inhabit today runs deep with heavy pollution. It starts in our formative years, where to be smart and achieving is to be a nerd, a dweeb, or a geek, with social praise instead relegated to those of accepted appearance, wealth, and mindless brawn, reinforcing the idea that to think, know, and challenge is to be ridiculed, while to uphold the status quo, conform to the ideals imposed by society, is to be rewarded. At what point does that multi-billionaire with the 5 mansions go from being a peak icon of culturally accepted success to an example of a severe mental disorder, amounting to compulsive addiction, in fact, where the billionaire is revealed as nothing more than a social abomination in disguise by their decision to hoard such excessive levels of problem-solving wealth for no other utility than mere ego status? But then again, we can't be too hard on them, right? For what they're doing is simply what they've been taught. Just as the religions you believe or the gaming strategies you use for survival are groomed and cultivated by the environmental condition of your existence, so are the many other waves of influence in this ocean of memes that comprise the zeitgeist of the time. So maybe we should start to question what it is we are actually trying to accomplish rather than complain, and look at the social normalities of progress and success as they exist. And I don't know about you, but I'm beginning to suspect that the new commercial lifestyle that has been touted by economists and historians as some marvel of human social development is actually a hidden form of retardation, an unseen manifest value distortion that is making us sick, antisocial, increasingly vain, ecologically indifferent, and perhaps more and more malleable for the controlling factions of our society itself. Maybe, just maybe, our modern cultural strives for so-called success itself are in fact not symptoms of social progress at all, but symptoms of a culture in decline. A new disease has struck America, rapidly moving across the world. A disease largely unknown in earlier periods and almost entirely unnoticed by those who carry it. A disease spread not by a physical virus or genetic predisposition, but through cultural memes, ideas which are in fact infecting minds, growing and mutating in various strains, inhibiting the mental well-being of many. It's called CVD, Consumption Vanity Disorder. It's a plague of modern society which not only pollutes the minds and values of those infected, it is also turning our world into a cesspool of mini-malls and self-image disorders, wasteful materialism, and belligerent social transgressions.
So I've been working with these girls for a few years now. What many don't know about CVD is that many substrains or mutations have occurred. These women here suffer from HGS, or hot girl syndrome. So I see we have a few new faces here. Would anyone like to introduce themselves?
I moved to Los Angeles a couple of years ago, and I started noticing weird changes happening to my body. Like my skirt started getting shorter and shorter, and I started spending more and more on cosmetics and heels and like cheap jewelry. And then the Botox injection started. And I just couldn't stop. My lips got more and more pouty. And by the second or third buttock augmentation, I was looping DVD reruns of America's Next Top Model and Extreme Makeover 24/7, dating one hot football star douchebag after the other, and the next thing I knew, I was on the cover of Vogue.
It's okay, honey. I was on the cover of Vogue, too.
If we go back to the early 20th century, we find a critical crossroad for industry, where the rapid technological advancement was beginning to challenge the most basic foundation of traditional economics, and hence, social operation. You see, at the core of our socioeconomic system is labor and demand. Without product demand, of course, there is no need for production or employment. And without employment, the working public draws no income or purchasing power to buy the goods that keep the economy going. Early in the 1900s, a powerful expansion of productivity through machine application and mechanization brought about something industry really hadn't seen before: a goods surplus. A 1927 article in Nation's Business, conducting an interview with then Labor Secretary James Davis, stated, "It may be that the world's needs ultimately will be produced by 3 days' work a week." Years later, engineer R. Buckminster Fuller described the phenomenon as being able to accomplish more with less, in that the energy, manpower, and resources needed to accomplish particular goals was actually decreasing, while the accomplishments themselves were accelerating. In other words, industry was becoming more technically efficient. However, pre-20th century America and Western society in general maintained an ethic of being frugal overall. There was a conservative ethos where goods were obtained for their utility, a culture of needs, not excessive wants, and most people really didn't see the need to increase their consumption simply because they could. So, the ruling industrialists and social planners had a choice at this point. Either the system was to be adapted to this new more with less productivity, which could mean a rise in leisure time, a shortening of the work week, and an adjustment of pay scales and good values to reflect this newfound abundance as need be. Or, something more dramatic had to happen. The very underlying values and affections of the culture would need to be altered, where the very idea of consuming became a utility in and of itself, to consume for the sake of consuming, in order to maintain the status quo. Well, needless to say, given the very nature of capitalist philosophy, the latter... What's that? Oh, right. Well, needless to say, given the very nature of capitalist philosophy, the latter idea was deemed to be the only rational option. The current ruling ethic of ever-increasing profit and gain by industry could not be compromised. So the alternative idea of working toward an abundance to meet human needs, enabling perhaps a level of personal freedom never before seen, maybe even flourishing a new period of enlightenment for human existence, was rapidly cock-blocked by the interests of the ownership class. And the world you see around you, full of ever-increasing bullshit, vanity, materialism, waste, debt-locked wage slaves, conflict, and impulsive, mindless consumption has been the result.
The holiday shopping season got off to a violent start. A temporary Walmart worker was trampled to death by shoppers eager for post-Thanksgiving bargains.
The mad dash into a Walmart store knocked shoppers to the ground near Grand Rapids, Michigan at 5 in the morning. Despite several people falling to the ground, shoppers charged ahead.
Girl, push one of my kids out, we'll stab one of you mother...
Another incident here, a 28-year-old pregnant woman was knocked to the ground by that same crowd. Witnesses here at the scene say that woman actually suffered a miscarriage.
And in Southern California, shots rang out inside a crowded toy store.
We say that a woman sprayed fellow shoppers. This actually happened with pepper spray.
Meanwhile, those who knew Damore call his death senseless.
They act like animals. Just to buy something for $5, say $5 there.
actually murdered this guy.
How long have you been out here?
I've been out here 3 days.
In your own words, what brings you here?
TVs. My kid wants what they wanted an iPad, I believe, the Samsung. But what happened was that they don't sell on that half price.
That's too bad. So, a lot of pushing and shoving happens in the stores. I remember seeing some stuff on the news. Have you ever had that experience before?
Not on Black Friday at a music concert, but I know how it feels, so I'm prepared.
So you're ready to push people back?
Pretty much.
What do you think of this kind of like impulsive sort of consumerism that gets really forceful sometimes?
I don't know. I feel like it's going to be a lot of stress for everybody.
Meet Eddie Bernays. He is considered the father of modern advertising, most famous for turning the largely abhorred word propaganda into the fluffy, warm euphemism public relations. Bernays haphazardly took popular ideas from Freudian psychoanalysis and began to apply them to advertising campaigns. The idea was simple: link and exploit the very primitive social urges common to most humans, such as sexuality and status, to a product.
Seems so much longer than last year.
It is. Nearly 4 inches longer in some models.
Oh!
Goods were to become less relevant in their utility and more of a symbol representing one's identity or individualism, effectively turning mere wants into emotional needs. Bernays was a response to a growing call by industrial leaders to reprogram society and create a new consumer culture. Charles Kettering, director of General Motors in 1929, wrote of the need to keep the consumer dissatisfied. Wall Street banker Paul Mazur said, "We must shift America from a needs to a desires culture. People must be trained to desire, to want things even before the old have been entirely consumed. We must shape a new mentality in America." And it worked. Technological innovation in radio and television helped further this end by a saturation campaign throughout American society, which quickly spread across the world. Advertising no longer was about describing, say, the function of a good and its inherent integrity. It was now about social manipulation, creating inferiority, shame, guilt, and false problems that could only be resolved by submission to purchase.
Over an 80-year lifespan, we watch 15 and a half years of television on average. 15 and a half years of having our brains liquefied and sodomized, zombified, and then glorifying products and nonsense. And that screws with us, because advertisements are assholes. They're assholes. Imagine if an advertisement were just a regular guy walking up to you on the street, just going, "Hey, hey you, hey, if you wore these jeans, then the hot girls would really do you." I mean like hot girls, not that ugly broad you call a girlfriend. And by the way, could you mention to her that she needs to lose a little weight and do something about her hair? And she could do it too if she would just use these diet pills and this hair gel. And by the way, both of you guys should probably be smoking these cigarettes and drinking this beer. Then you'd be really cool. Although your teeth are looking a little yellow, but we can fix that if you would just use this tooth whitening shit. And then the hot girls would really do you. And by the way, are you happy with your penis size? If you are, that's cool. A lot of guys are happy with fun size. Is that what you call that? Fun size? A lot of girls like that. I mean, I haven't met any, but I bet there are some. But if you change your mind, all you'd have to do is take a couple of these babies, and soon you would have to call up guys to help you carry your junk around like a train on a wedding dress. But how are you going to call your junk carriers with that crappy phone you got there? You should be using this phone with the swipey bullshit technology that makes other people feel like they're better than you just by owning this phone. And they are. They are better than you. Oh my God, all this stuff you need and don't have is making me anxious. Is it making you anxious? Is it? Are you anxious now? Are you? Well, then all you'd have to do is take a couple of these, and in 2 weeks' time, you would feel better than anything. Plus, bonus side effect, these pills also make your ass hair shiny and more manageable with extra bounce. Anyway, I gotta go, because your girlfriend just decided she looks pretty good in a vintage dress, and I gotta turn that around quick before she stops taking the Ambien Prozac cocktail I gave her, and then she'll stop shopping continuously in order to fill the void created by self-hatred, created by me. Would you hang out with that guy?
You see, at the core of advertising is the exploitation of our deep social nature. It turns the empathic community identification into a weapon of external judgment and relative insecurity. In fact, some years back, a multi-year study where Western television was brought into a culture which had never experienced it before was conducted on the island of Fiji. By the end of the observation period, the effect of materialistic values and vanity took a powerful toll. A relevant percentage of young women, for example, who prior had embraced a style of healthy weight and full features, became obsessed with being thin. Eating disorders, which were virtually unheard of in this culture, began to spread, and women specifically were transformed. But let's return to our history lesson. This vanity, materialism, and obsessive consumption neuroses, as powerful as it is, was not quite enough to ensure the stability of the capitalist religion and the ongoing benefit to the ownership class priests. The engineering of consent through advertising aside, the technological age brought another nasty problem for business: increased product efficiency. Not only was production moving faster than traditional consumption, the actual quality of individual goods were increasing as well, due to scientific advancements in design, making needed repeat purchases increasingly less common. Well, this was no good. Remember, the core driver of labor, profit, and consumption, hence the core driver of our economy in general, is scarcity and inefficiency. In fact, the enemy of the market economy has always been competency, and the better and long-lasting a good is, the worse it is for industry. So the water broke and planned obsolescence was born. In 1932, industrialist Bernard London propagated a pamphlet entitled "Ending the Depression Through Planned Obsolescence," where the idea of universally making poor goods to generate more labor demand and growth seemed logical. Some even wanted to make it mandatory for all industries, legally, where life cycles were decided not by the natural state of technological ability, but by the mere ongoing need for labor and increased consumption. In fact, the most notable historical example of this period was the Phoebus light bulb cartel of the 1930s, where in a time where light bulbs were able to last up to about 25,000 hours, the cartel forced each company to restrict light bulb life to a mere 1,000 hours to assure repeat purchases. And in time, this eventually became the strategic approach for all industries. And if you were to sit down and compare the true efficiency possible today to what we're actually doing to keep this waste and deprivation machine going, you would puke in your soup at the lost possibilities. And the final component to note here relates to the problem of purchasing power itself. A fail-safe was needed to ensure monetary circulation and so-called growth, even if the purchasing parties didn't have it. Well, welcome to credit expansion. Credit access has been, in reality, the core driver of economic growth in the West for a very long time. And a quick glance at the private and public debt today globally shows that it is not an anomaly for a person or country to live far beyond its financial means. It is indeed the set fashion. The amount of debt existing globally today far exceeds the entire global money supply itself, and it has been this borrowing from nowhere that has compensated for the inherent limits of employment and wages. However, as bothersome as all of this may seem with respect to ecological irresponsibility and cultural neuroses, the rabbit hole runs deeper. We often forget that the undercurrent of the last couple thousand years has been that some in our species are apparently more deserving than others, and the slavery, exploitation, and ensured deprivation of one group for the advantage of another was considered some law of nature. During feudalism of the Middle Ages, social divisions were clearly defined, with the king and his nobles and barons, etc., holding control of the legion of serfs who were essentially slaves in exchange for basic resources and moderate protection. A common theme during this period was that a genetic or religious superiority of the kings and his constituents gave them the right to dominate. However, as feudalism inched into state monopoly mercantilism and then into open market capitalism, the view of the average peasant laborer, or working class wage slave as they exist today, mutated to where whatever minor protections existed prior was removed to support a doctrine where if a person is not able to obtain work in the market economy, their right to life or mere existence is completely without security. Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and Thomas Malthus, and other pivotal figures of the dawn of modern capitalism, make it very clear that the system they advocate is not for everyone. It isn't as though they actually wanted it that way. They weren't Nazis or anything. But when you consider the scarcity-driven world which they lived, it did seem natural enough. Adam Smith, observing the nature of a social order defined by property relations, stated, "Civil government, so far as it is instituted for the security of property, is in reality instituted for the defense of the rich against the poor, or of those who have some property against those who have none at all." David Ricardo, building on Smith's invisible hand, pseudo-Darwinistic view of market survival, extended the notion to where the inevitable poverty and deprivation of the poor was to be a societal law of nature like gravity, with Malthus going so far to say that you only do harm to the poor by trying to help them. He stated, "Instead of recommending cleanliness to the poor, we should encourage contrary habits. In our towns, we should make the streets narrower, crowd more people into the houses, and court the return of the plague." Of course, many hearing such rhetoric today naturally react in apprehension, not understanding the source of such cold perspectives. Again, if we went back to pre-industrial Europe and witnessed the vast imbalance, scarcity, and poverty, perhaps in fact due to population outpacing production capacity, your intuition might draw the conclusion that the carrying capacity of the land simply can't handle the current population. You might also then come up with some very convenient justifications as to why some are to live and prosper and some are to die and be deprived, why some deserve a great deal of wealth and honor, and while others must be condemned to destitution and subsistence. So it is very easy to see how this classism has held strong, even though its counterparts of racism and sexism have slowly subsided in modern culture. Today, all economic schools of thought, from Keynesian to Austrian, support a will of the market theme, where your value is measured not by the fact that you exist as a human being, but by the place you hold or don't hold in the economic machine. Consider this quote by Ricardo. "By gradually contracting the sphere of the poor laws, by impressing on the poor the value of independence, by teaching them that they must not look to systematic or causal charity, but to their own exertions for support, that prudence and forethought are neither unnecessary nor unprofitable virtues, we shall by degrees approach a sounder and more healthful state." You see, the myth of this system is that people get what they work for, as though it's a level playing field, as though the competitive nature doesn't inherently breed corruption. Wrong! Oh, man. Bob, what's he doing here? So what kind of bullshit is Peter Joseph Stalin feeding you people this episode? Listen, man. Listen, people. What Captain Freedom Hater over here doesn't seem to understand is that the poor are fucking stupid. They're stupid and lazy, and they get what they deserve, all right? And I'm so sick of the nanny state coming in and taxing my hard-earned trust fund so these cretins can go and live it up with their lottery tickets and their malt liquor. Sorry, Bob. You all right? Put him back in his cage. Now, it is at this point you might be asking, what does any of this have to do with consumerism? Well, if you understand the traditional ethos of market capitalism and how it refuses to accept the possibility of taking care of everyone, coupled with the resulting delusion that those who do end up benefiting most must be smarter and more worthy of existence than others, as though it's some law of nature, the role of consumer culture today takes on a very different purpose. It exists as a powerful means of social control and maintaining the status quo of class division and subjugation. It helps perpetuate a trend that has been around for a long time, since the age of ordained kings who were destined to rule over and exploit the weak masses. You see, the individualistic material selfishness glorified today not only perfectly accentuates the classic economic values of Ricardo and Smith, it also reinforces modern neoliberalism, where the view of detached, independent, narrow self-interest and narcissism is held as deeply sacred, while any attempt at working towards a broad social consideration, working towards a community environment, is heretical. Simultaneously, it compounds class division, since the consumer culture has created an abstract sense of competition and status where to have more than others is equated to success. Suddenly, 1% of the population owning 40% of the planet's wealth is even more vindicated, along with how one can step over homeless people on the street and assume that they must be that way because of their own lack of initiative, laziness, or general inferiority. Modern consumer culture, the consumer vanity disease, ensures that the public remain distracted and at war with itself. It ensures that profits from these wasteful and unnecessary purchases, driven by emotional dissatisfaction, will continue to perpetuate and justify the wealthy elite. And it ensures that the poor and miserable of the world will be kept in their place, because guess what? It must be some law of nature. Final thoughts. Likely the most hijacked and delusional concept in the world today is that of freedom. In political poetics, historically, it went from a general interest to ensure quality of life and remove oppression, really, to a marketing gimmick to sell you things you don't need to ensure the integrity of an inherently elitist, corrupt political economy. I don't know about you, but I really don't give much of a shit about how many different kinds of toothpaste or deodorant I can choose from in a grocery store. While I'm given simultaneously the farce choice between two politicians clearly of the same breed in an election. I really don't care much for the freedom of being able to concoct, say, a grande white mocha double espresso non-fat steamed milk stirred unsweetened caffeine-free jerk me off slap my ass latte with extra whip at Starbucks. You see, the best form of social control is the kind where the illusion of choice actually persists, and the consumer vanity obsession rampant across the world now embodies the new form of democracy. Forget about the oligarchical plutocracy that continues to rule and destroy the world. Just focus on the rich celebrities on the cover of that goods catalog masquerading as a literary magazine. Forget about how financial and monetary gain is a measure of success and how delusional it really is, for the psychological phenomenon of relative deprivation has shown that having more and more luxury often does not make you happy, only more neurotic, insecure, and antisocial. Forget about the ever-increasing use of antidepressants and other mental health disorders that have emerged around our material society, and do what many do instead. Go shopping! Today, the act of shopping really has become a form of therapy for people if you're paying attention, an artificial means to feel better about oneself. And forget about the reality that the greatest lie behind the political system is that there can exist political equality in the wake of perpetual economic inequality. The fact is, the toxic condition that we've created around this new materialistic freedom is at the root of the vast waste of not only the Earth's resources, but the vast waste of human potential and human integrity itself. The more you own, the more you're owned. And as an aside, everyone's beautiful when they smile. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I'm late for my pedicure. So until next time, keep those eyes glued to the worst yet greatest reality show of all time. My name is Peter Joseph, and I, like you, am an agent and victim of a culture in decline.
So given the trials you all experience in your day-to-day coping with this disease, how has it affected your livelihood? Why don't we start with you? What are you doing for work?
Porn. Porn. Victoria's Secret model. Porn. Louis Vuitton model. Porn.
Guest model.
Porn.
American Apparel model. Okay, porn.
Oh, hello. Sorry. War. We love it, right? Blowing stuff up, watching people suffer and die. It's exciting. I mean, violence, domination, retribution, and other attributes of this competitive, warring fascination clearly dominates our media, with films, television, and other expressions constantly glorifying and reinforcing this gesture of conflict. In fact, it has been found that by the time an average kid reaches the age of 14 in the West, he or she has visually witnessed over 8,000 depicted acts of murder. So given all of this, it might make you wonder, does art imitate life, or does life imitate art? Likewise, isn't it interesting how most of us in America sleep quite well at night, while our military forces routinely invade, slaughter, and steal from other nations at will? As of course, all global empires have done historically. With this time a global civilian death toll well over 1 million in the past decade alone, many of them women and children. And yet the same American culture shudders in horror and confusion when some dude stumbles into an American schoolyard and randomly wipes out a couple dozen or so kids. I ask you, by what measure do we differentiate importance when it comes to the death of different groups of people? What makes us so special? While history is certainly full of xenophobic, racist, religious, and nationalist conceits, which have served as convenient justifications for external dehumanization, subjugation, and imperial power abuse, a rather unnoticed yet profound scientific truth has also emerged. Today, every person on Earth can trace his or her lineage back to a single, common female ancestor who lived about 200,000 years ago or so. Mitochondrial Eve, she is now called, proving indeed that we are truly one family. Likewise, the planet Earth, the habitat this family shares. It knows no division. It is a unified, synergistic system at every turn, fully connected. It has no idea what a nation or a politician or a racist is. It has no notion of any such human conceit for that matter, for division simply doesn't exist in the order of nature by which we are all invariably subject. Mark Twain once wrote, "Man is the only patriot. He sets himself apart in his country under his own flag and sneers at the other nations, and keeps multitudinous uniformed assassins on hand at heavy expense to grab slices of other people's countries and keep them from grabbing slices of his. And in the intervals between campaigns, he washes the blood off his hands and works for the universal brotherhood of man with his mouth." You know, while we all love to give lip service to the idea of peace and collaboration, holding up icons such as Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., something underneath the surface is clearly holding us back. Yes, we know for a fact that if we took the total war budgets of all the nations on Earth, tens of trillions of dollars over the past quarter century alone, and applied that energy-producing capital towards creating an advanced, intelligent, efficient system of Earth human management, not only would poverty and most deprivation be removed from our lives on the global scale, our progressive capacity to create, build, and improve, rather than pillage, seek, and destroy, could catapult the human family into an age of prosperity never before seen. Just imagine if we took, say, America's Pentagon or Britain's Northwood, along with all the world's advanced military centers, kicked all the army freaks out. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be harsh. I guess we have to do something with them. Maybe we can just take them all and place them in the Grand Canyon and just let them beat the piss out of each other, and hopefully they'll get it out of their systems and move on. I don't know, we'll figure that out later. But we, as the intelligent, mature human family, now interested in improving the lives of all, we use that incredible technology to help assist true developmental progress. Imagine if the Manhattan Project, which harnessed about 130,000 people, mostly scientists and technicians, was dedicated not to building a bomb that could destroy on a scale never before seen, but rather utilizing that collaborative drive to solve true global problems. Perhaps those very problems, in fact, which are causing the interest in war to begin with. Today, the hyper-glorified, romanticized obsession with competition, advantage, and conflict has made it into almost every facet of our lives. Not only do we declare war against virtually everything that annoys us. The war on drugs, the war on poverty, the war on crime, the war on terrorism, the war on cancer, you name it. We also, apart from the near constant nationalist wars, live in a perpetual state of common war, or class war, where we battle each other on a daily basis for unnecessary economic survival and delusions of status. The fact is, something has been set in motion that keeps us all on a multi-level war path. Something in our psychology and hence sociology is constantly pushing us into justifications of these patterns. And as this episode will argue, that something appears to reside at the very foundation of the socioeconomic condition itself. A foundation which has given rise to an ever-expanding, destructive neuroses, a neuroses clearly characteristic of a culture in decline.
This just in, the president has finished an emergency session at the White House where he announced that the security focus of his administration will be moving away from the global war on terror, instead focusing all available resources against something the administration has deemed a larger threat to U.S. and international security than anything recognized before: nature itself.
That's right, Dutch. The newly declared war against nature will be usurping funds from the Department of Homeland Security, effectively replacing it with a new department. The Department of... I think I'm reading this right. Fuck the Earth and the science it rode in on.
That's correct, Summer. The administration has already appointed a head to this new department, the CEO of Monsanto Corporation, Satan himself. When questioned regarding concerns about a possible conflict of interest of the new appointee, the Obama administration responded, "Monsanto's reputation of challenging the vast power of this intolerant, bullying force that goes by the terrorist name Natural Science holds great potential for our victory. We feel if anyone can take down these insurgent laws which restrict our God-given freedom, it is the professional experience of our true Lord and Master, the Prince of Darkness."
We've just been informed that a press conference is now underway with the Pentagon spokesperson answering questions. We now go live to the White House.
As the president said earlier, the greatest barrier to U.S. interests has been a constant state of offensive interference by this rogue network. Nature has been forcing its will against our freedom for long enough. Our economy, our values, the American way of life, it's not negotiable. Either nature concedes to our interests and stops terrorizing us with its hatred of our liberty, or we will be forced to destroy it. Next question.
Hi, Joe from LA Times. Don't you feel it could be a bad idea to move against a force which has historically never been overcome or even phased by human action? Also, I understand nature has given a set of demands which, if met, would cease many of its counterattacks. Has the administration considered just meeting these demands?
Listen, Joe, we don't negotiate with terrorists. And yeah, I've seen nature's demands, full of queer communist propaganda such as balance and sustainability. It even demands that we shut down our infinite growth consumption economy to make way for something where we are to be slaves to some oppressive natural regeneration respect. Listen, I didn't spend 35 years defending this country to have some metaphysical terrorist group with science on its side ruin what has made this nation great. No further questions.
When we think of war, we usually think about gun-wielding soldiers, tanks, flamethrowers, fancy medal honors, and other theatrics. Yet, when we step outside the theater, digging deeper in our examination of the world around us, we find that war is actually a state of mind, a reaction, driven by some type of competitive condition. And if we had to classify the different levels of large-scale competition, we might end up with two broad categories: imperial war and class war. Imperial war, otherwise known as national war, is when an aggressor nation decides to invade some other nation, justified by some form of perceived threat. Back in the day, this threat often appeared as purely ideological, with religious groups battling it out to make sure they were in good with God, while in the mildly more literate scientific world today, the threat is more often than not pitched as direct to each of us. You know, such as, say, a rogue nation getting a nuclear weapon to blow up your grandmother's bingo tournament. Bingo. Or perhaps a crazed, state-funded hijacker crashing a plane into your favorite taco stand. Bastards. Regardless, in virtually every historical case, the justification for war put forward for public digestion has, always, been far from the truth. You see, there is indeed always a true threat, but that threat has little to do with the vast majority of the population. Instead, it is a threat that bothers only the highest echelons of the social hierarchy, an elitist upper-class self-preservation based around a loss of broad power and control. I mean, when was the last time the citizenry actually cried out for war? It doesn't happen, only the politicians go for it. And since the establishment would be hard-pressed to explain to their citizens that they are going to invade some nation for its natural resources, maintain currency domination, enable freedom for transnational corporations, along with other generally economic concerns to secure the interests of the upper 1%, various superficial psychological ploys are used instead. The most common today is the moral crusade.
We must not tolerate this regime using military force against its own people,
coupled with some basic yet irrational threat of attack.
Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile activity poses a real threat, not just to the United States, but to Iran's neighbors and our allies.
In the words of famed sociologist Thorstein Veblen, writing from 1917, any warlike enterprise that is hopeful to be entered on must have the moral sanction of the community. It consequently becomes the first concern of the warlike statesman to put this moral force in train for the adventure on which he is bent. You see, a large part of the imperial war is the psychological war against the domestic citizenry itself. The U.S. government spends billions of dollars every year on public relations and recruitment alone, producing signs like this one. For our nation, for us all. Is it me or does that sound like Orwellian doublespeak? If it's for our nation, then it clearly isn't for us all, as the human species is the closest thing we have to all. And if it's actually referring to all of us in the nation, well, that would be hideously redundant, right? I think what they mean to say in this warm, loving community slogan is, for our nation, screw the rest.
Hello, welcome to the show! My name is Pepe, and today I've got something very special for you. A true international delicacy. War! To prepare for war is a very delicate matter. And the first thing we need to do is create some spicy tension to put fire in your belly. So, the first ingredient we need is a well-tempered provocation. Provocations are, of course, seasonal and subject to personal taste. So, may I suggest something along the lines? A marinade Gulf of Tonkin. A robust Pearl Harbor. And if you're feeling bored, a bustling 9/11. Then we let that cook for a bit and prepare our second ingredient over here. A special sauté to give life to our fiery dish. The mainstream media. Whoa! Can you just smell the propaganda and delectable ignorance? After we get a nice sizzle going, we now add our final, more important ingredient. The delicious soldiers. Now, the most ripe soldiers tend to grow in the more poor, rural area of the world, often with limited literacy. Want to pick them around 18, 19, because their brains are very immature and quite yummy. It's perfect for participation in our war meal. And so we mixed it all together. Up, up, take it. Perhaps add some preservatives like patriotism, not too much, jingoisms, and of course our very special secret sauce. Okay, and we are ready. The moment you have all been waiting for. Voilà! I present to you the greatest international delicacy of our time. War. Bon appétit.
You know, perhaps one of the most amusing aspects of national war is the circus-like pageantry and ceremonialism. Cute costumes, little hats, shiny pieces of metal, various parades and official posturing, and all adornments and theatrics that give this air of honor and authority. Of course, this is not to dismiss the true sacrifice of those who have given their lives in war, as there are always two sides. This true honor comes from a position of working to help others, not exploit them. And just as we hold the bravery of a firefighter who enters a burning building to save a child in high regard, the intention to help society through military service is, indeed, a noble gesture. Even though, sadly enough, 99% of those who enter the military with such noble intentions are more often than not being exploited for the criminal purposes of the corporate state. Still, you have to be impressed by this skill to give credence to an idea merely because of the nature of its presentation. In fact, whether it's academia, the news media, government itself, the military, or anything else in society, our culture tends to believe and respect people merely because of their presentation, confidence, and rhetoric, not the actual meaning or reasoning of the communication itself.
Did you know that the first television sets in the 1950s were actually supposed to be used as prosthetic replacement heads to give new hope for those who had been tragically decapitated? But technology, weight, and cord length being what they were at the time, it failed. Luckily, they could play other things besides the faces of the deceased, and TV sets sold nationwide. And it's all true. You know why? Because you heard it from some guy in a tie.
In the end, once the traditional, propagandized illusions in defense of the act of organized human murder and resource theft have been overridden, dismissing such shallow justifications as paternalism, honor, and protectionism, we realize that war today is actually an inherent characteristic of the propertied, scarcity-driven business system. Major General Smedley D. Butler, one of the most notable and decorated officers in U.S. history, stated the following with respect to the business of war in 1935. I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service, and during that period I spent most of my time as a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street and the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. I helped make Mexico, and especially Tampico, safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the national city boys to collect revenues in. I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. I helped purify Nicaragua for the International Banking House of Brown Brothers in 1902 through 1912. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for the American sugar interests in 1916. I helped make Honduras right for the American fruit companies in 1903. In China in 1927, I helped see to it that Standard Oil went on its way unmolested. Looking back on it, I might have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was to operate his racket in 3 districts. I operated on 3 continents. So given all of this, it's unique how the general public tends to separate the day-to-day competitive business acumen from the severe form of competitive violent warfare, when there's very good evidence to show that they are deeply intermeshed. To gain some perspective on this, we now welcome back our resident guru, Louis the Logic Gremlin. Before we get into the questions, I do have a letter here that I'd like to read to you and get your opinion on. It reads, Dear Peter, I really enjoy the new show. I think it is helping get these important messages across. However, I am disappointed with the crude Louis the Logic Gremlin character, as it is just irritating and hideously stupid. Also, would you please stop eating when you are speaking in the show? It's really disgusting and annoying. Rock on, Joe. I'm sorry, Joe. Louis, what do you think about that? Totes. Sorry, Joe. Shit stays. All right. So what's the skinny on war, man? Aren't we just crazy animals that have to be in endless conflict with each other due to our biology or something? Okay, I see what you're saying. So you're saying that war is actually a system consequence. Interesting. So how do we resolve this war tendency then? Gotcha. Well, thank you for your time, Louis. To gain some public consensus on the issue, we now turn live to our East Coast Culture and Decline correspondent, Big Scotty D, who's live in New York City to talk to people about what they think of war.
Well, thank you, Peter. I'm here in New York City on a beautiful, cold day, and we're going to try to find some people to maybe talk to. Excuse me, ma'am. Would you like to? Excuse me, sir. Sir, would you like to talk about the war? What? Would you like to talk about the war, sir? Would you like to talk about the war today? The war? No. Surely, would you like to talk about the war? God bless. No, the war, please. The war. No. You don't like to talk about the war. No. I'm just sick of this, Peter. You're sending me on these assignments. It's freaking freezing out here. You know, it's like I'd rather be in a bar getting drunk, and then maybe I can do this. All right? I think there's a bar up here. Let me just grab my shit. You know, I'm just sick of this. Stuff. That's it. I am done, man. I am done. Get some other monkey, okay?
There's trash, there's shit all over the place. But what does Peter want to know about? He wants to know about the war. Well, I'm sick of it, man. I gotta calm down. I just need a drink.
Any of you Occupy Wall Street types? Oh, it's not about money, except when you can't eat. And it's not about foreclosures, except when you got nowhere to sleep. It's not about elections, except when they can be bought. And it's not about the wars, except when they're fought. It's not about the environment, except when we're running out of time. And it's not about my choices, except when they're not mine. It's not the lack of justice, except when you can't fight back. And it's not about the police, unless you're black. Fuck this shit. Fuck this shit. Come on, you wanna say it? Fuck this shit. Everybody, fuck this shit. Don't worry, none of these people are gonna be at work tomorrow. Fuck this shit.
We're so totally ruled by the 1%, which is basically all the corporations wanting to sell us shit and influence us and influence our culture so that we can't even think for ourselves, and we're our sense of self is altered, and even like our sense of health. And like, I don't even fucking smoke. I don't know where this come from. Jesus.
Peter Joseph has asked us to stand out here in the freezing cold and talk about the difference of classes here. But you know, who's sitting in like his LA loft, like relaxing with like his big, you know, flat screen TV.
Yeah, fuck him.
Fuck Peter Joseph.
The only thing that we don't have is like a war on something is war on war. And I think that's because like us peace activists, we don't want to fight. So we're going to end up losing due to irony.
Final thoughts. How do we think about resolution to something as detrimental as national war when, on the micro level, we in society actually praise, reward, and reinforce the same basic underlying competitive drive? Generally, when faced with such a question, people tend to play the morality card, as though a matter of degree is what's relevant, not the philosophical basis itself. And usually this vague distinction is gestured to the effect that competition is good, but we should never go too far and be violent in any way. So then, of course, the question becomes, what constitutes violence? What if, instead of physically attacking you directly, I put you into a subtle yet deeply toxic condition where your life was shortened by decades via heart disease, cancer, mental illness, and other such consequences? Would that be considered violent? And what if such intentions were not even directly malicious, such as a lower class, desperate single mother forced to work 3 jobs to keep up, who fails one night to provide proper supervision for her child, resulting in the death of her child? I ask you, what is the true origin of the resulting death? And does that qualify as violent? To paraphrase Mahatma Gandhi, poverty is the worst form of violence. You see, the real war going on is not as obvious as many think. The real war exists in the very structure of our society itself. Something public health officials have now termed structural violence. A war, in fact, against public health and balance itself, constantly producing casualty after casualty in its hidden oppression, and this form of violence today kills more people than every type of direct behavioral violence put together. Its origin? A social system literally built upon competition and exploitation itself. So, for all you noble activists out there, for all of you who pile into protest zones each time a new national war emerges and yell at the top of your lungs, keep in mind that you are only targeting a symptom of a larger sociological problem, and until the activist community realizes this, I'm sorry to say, your protests have no long-term consequence, as they do not address the root problem. But, on the bright side, it's still great entertainment, right? So let's keep watching this bizarre human experiment. Certainly the greatest yet worst reality show of all time for sure. I'm Peter Joseph, and yes, I, like you, am an agent and victim of a culture in decline. Where's the credit scene? What? What do you mean Bob didn't get hurt? I'm sorry, Bob. It's the format of the show.
What if what I'm about to tell you makes you question what is what? What if I propose a what-if scenario? What if I were to take up precious time in your busy life, just spinning you in a soul-dulling spiral with meaningless double talk? But at the same time, what if I kept you distracted with flashy graphics? Would you notice? Or for that matter, would you care? You're too busy listening to some guy in a tie and sleep.
Then, at 2:50 p.m., more than half the runners were through. The first bomb explodes.
Breaking news from Canada. Police say they've broken up an al-Qaeda-linked terrorist attack that was aimed to disrupt a major North American transportation route.
A sharp new warning of all-out war. For the first time, the mysterious and secretive nation has threatened a preemptive nuclear strike against the U.S.
Staying in Europe, Spain is also feeling the economic pinch. 1 in 4 are now currently unemployed in that country, and the EU expects that number to climb even higher.
China and neighboring countries are mobilizing resources to fight off a new strain of bird flu.
Hospitals in a race against time to contain nightmare superbacteria.
before it spreads from the hospital out into the world.
Jesus, you scared me. But hey, I guess that's okay, right? I mean, if you watch the news these days, there seems to be a lot to be concerned about. Nuclear war, terrorism, mass shootings, city bombings, corporate fraud, bird flu, bank failures, unemployment, contamination, gangs, general crime, and depending on your temperament and conditioning, perhaps you've already armed yourself to the teeth and are watching this show from an underground bunker somewhere, waiting for the end of civilization itself. Well, whatever the concern, the idea of protection or security from such woes are ever pervasive today. Prisons, police, insurance, warranties, protection agencies, military and domestic armament, airport groping, government surveillance, and the like reveals a culture of fear, if you will, on many levels. Not to mention that the modern trends of such security risks are certainly fascinating. For example, before the 1980s, the thought of someone going into their workplace and, wiping out a couple people was a relatively remote concept. Today, we repeatedly see these acts of seemingly random violence, not only in businesses, but in schools, churches, movie theaters, malls, sporting events, and other common institutions. And as unfortunate as this dark reality of our human capacity is, it's perhaps not as unfortunate as the archaic methods we as a civilization have concocted in our attempt to counter such problems. For instance, in the wake of growing U.S. gun violence, the National Rifle Association will tell you that the problem is a lack of armed security at every turn. And if we only would just, arm everybody like the Wild West, problems of social violence would subside. While at the other extreme, folks will tell you that the problem is rather due to an ease of access. It's too simple to get weaponry, and the removal of this easy access is now the correct path. However, do either of these address the real issue, the source of the behavioral problem at hand? Where is the national discussion about, say, motivation and the sociological condition itself to which these acts erupt? I point this out because in a technological age where people can now print automatic weapons in secret with home 3D printers, paving the way for an eventual nanotech revolution that will enable the public to create powerful weapons at home, bypassing commercial regulation itself, perhaps we need to rethink our sense of causality here. For unless you intend to outlaw scientific progress itself, regulation isn't going to amount to a damn thing in the long run. Likewise, come to think of it, maybe we also need to step back and reframe what a viable threat to our safety really is, and how it measures up to other threats. On April 15th, 2013, bombs exploded during the Boston Marathon in the United States, killing 3 people, gaining global attention, almost like it was another 9/11. Yet in Iraq, on the exact same Monday, bombs exploded, killing 20 times as many people, and yet no one in the mainstream media seemed to care much about that. You see, if you pay attention, you might notice that the true quantifiable magnitude of a threat or the actual toll of violence really doesn't mean much in the establishment perception. It's the idea, the context, the political spectacle that matters, and this might explain why America has spent almost $5 trillion on so-called terrorism when U.S. citizens today, and statistically have always, been more likely to die of a peanut allergy or in the bathtub than in a terrorist attack. So, as the following episode will argue, the security fear industry, stretching from the ever-exploitative news media to the military-industrial complex to the criminal justice system, not only exploits sociological distortion birthed out of the very fabric of our deprivation, scarcity-driven social order, it now appears to be accelerating in a vicious cycle. And I don't know about you, but given all of this, I'm beginning to suspect that maybe, just maybe, the very foundation of our socioeconomic system is in play here, no longer existing as a functional mode for human progress on this planet, but rather as a conduit for a culture in decline. Prison. From the dark dungeons of the Middle Ages to our modern industrial mass incarceration correctional facilities, the prison system is a signature edifice of society today. The United States, the land of the free, now has the highest inmate population in the world, incarcerating over 2.3 million, in fact. The U.S. has locked up more people than any other country on the planet, boastfully housing 25% of the entire world's prison population, with an 800% increase in incarceration in the past 30 years alone. Based partly on the need to remove active threats from society, coupled with an ever-bleak undertone of retribution and revenge, the punitive, negative reinforcement tradition common to our justice system is now being challenged by some very basic realizations in the human sciences. We often forget that when it comes to human conduct, true behavioral causality has historically been ignored, with the focus rather on spooky, superstitious forces such as good and evil. Well, as convenient as such ambiguous metaphysical assumptions are, modern social science now places so-called criminal or antisocial acts in the context of public health, with real solutions resting in the arena of preventive medicine, not mere punishment. Of course, as with most rational perspectives in the world today, this view is rather agitated, for it shatters the glorified, free will, morally empirical traditional assumptions our entire criminal justice system is built upon. However, let's put that aside for now, and point out the fact that while most naturally do fear prison, its effect as a deterrent is actually quite weak. Considering U.S. trends, we see a massive increase in incarceration over time, so with this basic observation, the punitive threat of prison clearly isn't working statistically. Likewise, prison is supposed to be some form of rehabilitation center, right? So does this system work to reform human behavior, taking in so-called criminals and outputting mentally healthy, law-abiding citizens? No. In the United States, 2/3 of prisoners released reoffend within 3 years, often with a more serious and violent offense. Dr. James Gilligan, former director of the Center for the Study of Violence at Harvard Medical School, actually refers to prisons as graduate schools for crime and violence. So given all of this, perhaps we need to step back a bit, shake off the shackles of common perception, and ask ourselves what other roles the judicial and prison system really have. For if incarceration isn't statistically working as a deterrent, and those who get out of prison are more often worse than they were when they went in, something is clearly wrong. What else is going on here? You know, while the justification of incarceration is certainly viable with respect to true social threats, no different than the medical need to quarantine somebody who is a threat to society because of a contagious disease, the evolution of the prison tradition reveals some very dark truths. And the best way to think about it is from an historical perspective, considering race conflict, class conflict, in the context of economic and political expedience. The first thing to understand is that political power, like economic power, is sourced in social inefficiency. In other words, politicians need something to fight, and to a certain degree, the more problems a society has, the more the citizens tend to feel the need to give up their power to government control, with the most proven effective type of problem being fear. Usually fear of some perceived, identifiable, external group. Of course, this idea has been acknowledged for years, such as by political theorist Carl Schmitt in his The Concept of the Political, saying that political unity is achieved by defining a common enemy. Nothing new. The Nazis did this with the Jewish culture, the early US did this with the Native American culture, and so on. In short, the trick is to push the idea that some subculture, usually in the minority, is the true source of all of society's woes, generating mass resentment and thereby ignoring more accurate, yet politically inconvenient realities. And while direct racism and discrimination is certainly alive and well in the world today, the more elusive yet relevant bias is actually economic. You see, the greatest threat to any political establishment is... What do you mean? This? This is a platform. It's 3-dimensionals. This is the base. Yeah, I know it's not very good. Fuck off, Bob. Don't make me shoot you again. You see, the greatest threat to any political establishment is any challenge to its underlying economic foundation, as all political platforms are rooted in an economic bias one way or another. And if you can brainwash the public into, say, viewing the failures of capitalism as instead rooted in the poor moral virtue of a trouble-causing subsection of the population, rather than a built-in consequence of perhaps capitalism's elitist psychology and scarcity-driven structure, you can maintain control. And this is where the common enemy scapegoat scam comes into play. It's not that bad. We simply demonize the victims of this system, shifting blame away from the more relevant environmental, causal, social condition itself. And in the context of the justice system, the war on crime is a perfect tool. All the war on crime is a war on the poor and economically irrelevant. And if a society is conditioned to believe that a person breaking into their car to steal property is simply an amoral abomination with all the life choices in the world otherwise to make ends meet, then the causal shift is a success. The reality, however, is that most of those incarcerated today are there almost always due to crimes born from deprivation. Deprivation, which can be generalized in two forms: relative and absolute. Absolute deprivation is when a person's most basic needs are simply not met, and poverty is the lead source. The spectrum of disorder that arises from poverty is vast, from drug dealing, theft, and prostitution in areas lacking employment opportunities, to emotional loss, self-worth neuroses, and illegal self-medication, leading to complex and elusive chain reactions which can result in destructive antisocial behavior. Today, 1 out of every 15 African American kids in the United States have at least one parent in prison, usually the father. It's bad enough that the father figure is important to familial survival as the historical breadwinner, but the proven emotional toll on children who must go without such an influential parental figure also has dark results, as those children are also statistically more likely to be imprisoned as adults, in fact. And if you combine poverty with emotional deprivation, you have the perfect recipe for not only the manifestation of socially aberrant behavior, but the perpetuation of such distortions across generational time. Relative deprivation, on the other hand, is when our sense of worth and self-respect is associated to our cultural perception of success, while absolute deprivation is measured by basic health concerns, expressing the ever-important need for society to work to efficiently meet our immutable human needs for sanity and true security. Relative deprivation exists in the realm of subjective comparison and resulting dehumanization. And likely the greatest example of this negative pressure is the state of class imbalance in the world. While it is true that the formerly classified poor of the West today actually live, in material terms, better than the upper class 1,000 years ago, the dehumanizing wealth stratification occurring today continues to create complex, destabilizing psychosocial problems. Long considered an incentive for social progress, class difference and wealth imbalance has turned out to be a powerful public health issue, generating massive psychological and sociological distortion.
Want to be intellectually honest? The issues raised here have more to do with commerce than they do with the Second Amendment. A lot of people make a lot of money selling firearms and ammunition.
The National Rifle Association has said the solution is to have armed security guards at every school.
Certainly, every piece of security we engage in can be helpful, but it's, foolish to think that only security is what we need. The great challenge is here, can we prevent these tragedies?
I'm sorry to interrupt, Chief, but since you've just brought up this notion of prevention, which is, of course, the real issue here, right? I'm curious when this conversation is going to move to more relevant social science. I see we have, for example, the NRA here. Hi. Yet we don't have anyone from the pharmaceutical industry. Isn't it true that most of the mass shootings that have commenced have been done by people who are under the influence of psychologically mood-altering medications? Or better yet, where's the drug czar of this country? Since the war on drugs has commenced, there has been a massive increase in gun-related drug violence. Are we just going to ignore this causality as well? Or better yet, I almost forgot, I have here about 100 years of data on the relationship between economic imbalance, specifically wealth imbalance, and violence. You know, the stats have become very clear now that the gap between the rich and the poor creates more violence. The more gap, the more violence. And crime on the whole. Which might explain, by the way, why the United States, with the largest income gap in the world, also has the most violence and worst public health of any first world nation. Is this not worth a congressional discussion? I mean, with all due respect, you people can't possibly be naive enough to think that the reduction of certain guns, as the left suggests, or the increase in armed security in public places, as the right suggests, is really going to have a long-term effect on such deeply rooted sociological problems, right? A problem clearly rooted in structured dehumanization and economic deprivation. It's inherent to our social system. You know, is it not of some viable consideration to address this issue? No? Really? And then we have the so-called war on drugs. When Richard Nixon declared the drug war in 1971, he asked for an initial $84 million. In 2013, the National Drug Control Budget requested $25.6 billion, with about $1 trillion spent in total, and the result over time has been more drugs, easier access, increased potency, and more users. Today, almost half of the federal prison population are non-violent drug offenders, often mere users, in fact, clearly a mental health issue rather than a punitive one. Draconian mandatory sentencing laws today can send kids to prison for decades for mere possession. And it is no secret that this criminalized subculture has been mostly born out of the prohibitive underground economies necessarily sprouted in poor areas of the country, largely occupied by minorities. As an aside, we often forget how deeply racist the United States has been historically, assuming vast improvement. And yet today, there are more African Americans behind bars than were slaves before the American Civil War. After segregation, the black community was strategically isolated into low-income inner-city ghettos, which systematically robbed them of economic opportunity. And as the national culture matured, with racism slowly dissipating through the civil rights movement, the economic oppression set in motion at that time remained, creating a powerful cycle ever since. Today, 1 out of every 3 black men are expected to go to prison at some point in their lives. And, in effect, the real oppressive mechanism in the world today is no longer race, but economic class. And the punchline is brutal. Not only are the poor and forgotten of our society conveniently turned into criminals, rather than clear examples of the failure of our social model, capitalist ingenuity prevails once again, transforming these people into pure, saleable commodities, creating a massive profit industry out of an otherwise economically useless social class. From thriving income generation via fines, tickets, bail posting, and lawyer fees, to the now massive network of servicing the millions of inmates via healthcare, food production, security hiring, parole officers, and the like, the prison and security industrial complex in the West is a thriving business enterprise and positive factor on economic growth. The cost to imprison one person for 1 year in the state of California is about $47,000. Extrapolating that to the total U.S. 2013 prison population of about 2.3 million, the incarceration service alone amounts to over $100 billion a year in income, and this isn't counting the other 5 million currently being serviced on parole. Today, the Corrections Corporation of America, G4S Wackenhut, and other private for-profit security and prison firms benefit their investors and shareholders when incarceration rates increase. Not to mention the now extremely common labor use, or slave labor use, I should say, of the prisoners themselves. And yes, we might feel some moral outrage when a Pennsylvania judge gets caught sending kids to private detention centers for cash kickbacks. But then again, are we really surprised? There are even small towns in the Midwest where the majority are employed by the local prison. And if they don't have crime and prisoners, their town's economy is in the toilet. Not to mention that most police departments derive enormous funding from drug arrests and seizures. If the drug war stopped, the police department would lose billions in this country. And yes, the rabbit hole runs even deeper. If we step back even farther, we see a broader economic reinforcement here. You see, the drug trade is far from limited to your local street thugs. Today, U.S. and European banks launder about $1 trillion in criminal, mostly drug money each year. Drug money has actually become a very relevant part of the Wall Street machine. Even just recently, HSBC Bank got caught moving about $1 billion in drug money. Did the criminal executives get sent to jail? Of course not. Why? Because the legal system is mostly there to control the poor, not regulate the rich. HSBC paid a fine and moved on, likely working to reposition themselves again like the dozen or so other major banks that continue to launder drug money each year. Dick! Anyway, returning to our main point, this now highly capitalized blame game, common enemy approach, is not just there to dismiss the resulting poor, it is ubiquitous at every turn. Whether common crime, terrorism, mass murders, or anything destabilizing, we see the mainstream media and even many in the so-called activist community completely missing the point, buried under the propaganda of in-the-box establishment self-preservation to one degree or another.
And you know what Bill Moyer's solution to that is? Let nonviolent criminals out, like heroin dealers. Yeah, that's non-violent. You're a genius, Bill.
To have universal gun registration.
What about...
Wait, that's an important point.
I am listening.
For some reason, Wayne LaPierre is not making, so you're going to have to hear it from me. Universal background check means universal registration. Universal registration means universal confiscation, universal extermination.
You know, it's like God is saying to us, look, you got to work with me on this. You got to work with me on this. I've given you a brain. I've given you the Second Amendment to your Constitution. I have given you weapons. Now, why don't you use them?
The tyrants did it. Hitler took the guns. Stalin took the guns. Mao took the guns. Fidel Castro took the guns. Hugo Chavez took the guns. And I'm here to tell you, 1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
And the 21st Century Culture in Decline Belligerent Right-Winged Freak Show Award goes to...
Alex Jones.
Woo! Give me that, you son of a bitch. Huh. It's about time I won an award. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Alex Jones. And you know what? I'm here to rape your butt. You know why? Because it's going to feel better if I do it before the New World Order does. That's right. The globalists are positioning themselves behind you right now. They're going to take your guns, put you in FEMA camps, and make you their slaves. They think I'm a slave? I'm not a slave. And then late one night when you're drinking their homosexually fortified juice boxes, bam! The butt rape begins. And you'll be happy that old Alex was there first to loosen you up real nice and good. Now, people, I'm not going to take too much time because I'm a humble man. But I want everybody to go to my website right now and buy my newest DVD, The Conspiracy. How the global elite pays me to make the liberty movement look insane. That's right, people. I'm an astroturfer. I'm not here to help things. I'm here to make activists look like freaks. I take viable issues of real concern and make them sound as ridiculous as possible. Just like all the other bobbleheads out there. I'm here to distract you, you morons. And keep you fighting about nonsense. And I get paid to do it. Woo!
We interrupt this broadcast for an emergency announcement. It's an emergency because we say it is.
This just in, U.S. airports remain on high alert at this time due to a pronounced terror threat. According to the FBI, a new sophisticated form of terrorist technology has surfaced, which is now forcing rapid new revisions of TSA airport security procedures.
That's correct, Summer. On the heels of the 2006 liquid bomb threat and 2009 underwear bomber, this obscure new approach was revealed to authorities in a videotape allegedly found in an outhouse in Willy Wonkistan. While the date of the video is unknown, along with no clear understanding of who made it, the use of machetes, headdresses, and Arabic language was enough for federal authorities to declare it is indeed Al-Qaeda.
The rather grainy video appears to show a medical procedure instructing how to implant explosives in the body cavities of babies, puppies, and kittens. Viewer discretion is advised.
Baby go boom!
In response to this development, the TSA, after an initial failed attempt to simply ban such creatures outright, has now instituted a new universal rule. All carry-on babies and small pets under 52 ounces must be sealed in a see-through plastic bag.
Most people don't realize, but the Earth has been slowing for many years. And were it not for these huge and expensive fans behind me, we would have ground to a complete day and night halt. And every word out of my mouth is true. Do you know why? Because you heard it from some guy in a tie.
I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, but Bob is officially dead. Final thoughts. We live in a social model based upon scarcity and inefficiency. This means that the more society solves problems, meets human needs, and stabilizes itself by recognizing the potentials and limits of natural law, the less economically viable it is in the monetary economy. There's a reason why Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s final pursuit was a guaranteed income system in the United States. For he knew that racism was, in many ways, an extension of classism, and the existence of poverty and deprivation in a world that can create an abundance to meet everyone's needs was nothing more than structural oppression coming from a failed and elitist social system. An impression that, in fact, generates crime and destabilization in a vicious cycle. You want to see a decline in prohibitive economies for drug sales, prostitution, and black market theft rings. You want to see society stop its enormous use of self-medicating drugs, both legal and illegal. You want to see an end of national war, an improvement of our social infrastructure so disease and accidents can be dropped to a relative fraction of what we have now. Or perhaps you want to see the end of school shootings, gun violence, and acts of terrorism, both in the context of state-funded black ops and real blowback. Then it's time the human family recognize its global potential to achieve a post-scarcity reality, work to strategically share our resources, work to meet human needs directly, and focus collaborative energy on interests for true collective human betterment, hence removing the inherent warfare unnecessarily built into our archaic socioeconomic system, along with all the resulting racism, hatred, dehumanization, oppression, and elitism it manifests. And no, I'm not telling you to go write your congressman. If the social system is the disease, then those who appoint themselves to assist its operation are the tumors and lesions. Voting with ballots or assuming what you choose to spend money on is going to change the way this world works is delusion. It's going to take a new approach, a parallel uprising of power to shift the tide. And whether we're aware of it or not, this is happening slowly right now around us in the world. And the question is, where are you in this interest? And do you even care? If not, well, welcome to the Culture in Decline. And this show, as shitty as it is going to keep running. If so, then perhaps maybe this terrible reality show may come to an end faster than we think. But until that happens, rest assured I'll be here, arrogantly pointing out that most everything you believe and hold dear is wrong. So get back to your Bibles, video games, internet porn, and AK-47s, bitches, and have some fun out there in this dark circus we call normality. And until next time, I'm Peter Joseph, and whether you like me or not, I exist as an agent and victim of a culture in decline.
Ladies and gentlemen, don't let this fatly looking body fool you, okay? I work out 4 times a day, I run 19 miles a day, and I drink Tangy Tangerine like it's my job, all right? I'm only big like this because the New World Order makes me... People, you know what keeps old Alex up at night? It's these daggum globalists. I'm sorry, I said globalists. Listen up, people. These neocons are suckling the buzzard. That ain't your mama. It's these NWO scum. They're going around trying to butt rape everybody. They're just nothing but a butt rape machine. It's these NWO globalist communist scum that are going around like a butt rape machine. I'm a butt rape machine. Butt rape machine. People, I am a butt rape machine. You know what? Instead of the bald eagle, the national symbol should be a man laying in submission in the fetal position, peeing on himself. That's what it should be. Peeing all over his damn self. If you can't tell, this is all an act. It's a shtick. That's why I act all crazy and shit. Flailing my arms and my neck like this. It's an act. It's a shtick. I need money. Woo!
Keep grunting.
Yeah, how about that? You like some of that? You want some, Peter?
Oh, hey! You ever play these funky little logic puzzle things? You might discover them when bored silly at the airport. Nothing mysterious. They give you a set of system rules which discipline you towards achieving a certain goal. Yes, perhaps not the most exciting thing in entertainment today. I don't know. Maybe there's something more to this whole logic and reason deal than just killing time while in transit. Of course, we all naturally assume that we're being well-reasoned in our decision-making, right? In fact, it could be argued that to some degree, such associative causal logic is inherently inescapable, effectively wired into our brains with respect to how we interpret and link our experiences. Yet, it's that very issue of degree that appears to be where the problems arise. As all too often, the foundational premises upon which we frame our conclusions are indeed utterly faulty, or without proper evidence to be considered factual to begin with. Needless to say, being logical within a cognitive framework of the illogical only takes you so far. And today, if you dig deep into the origins and basis of perpetuation of our most cherished institutions, from religion to politics to economics to the social order itself, you might discover something called faith rather than reason. And faith, by definition, is not the premise of logic. Faith is belief without evidence, and hence contradictory to the entire process of understanding itself. In 1961, engineer R. Buckminster Fuller created a global simulation called the World Game. The idea was to, quote, make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without ecological damage or disadvantage to anyone, unquote. It's a pretty simple and rational thought exercise, a logic puzzle, if you will, on the most grand scale, which, even in basic gesture, actually stands in stark contrast with the organizational frame of reference our established society currently operates within. In truth, all this train of thought suggests is to take a broad design perspective to the Earth and human society, using what we now know regarding scientific causality, as opposed to the wheeling and dealing, inherently elitist market anarchy, which moves the world by arguably a rigid, superstitious faith that the invisible hand of the market knows all and sees all. I ask you, what if we dared to view the Earth as a single puzzle board, a problem to be solved, with our logic based around the Earth's natural rule set, the known laws of physical science? What if our goal was to maximize our economic efficiency, to design out poverty, to design out national war, to work structurally to create a clean energy abundance, and hence to work to facilitate a material success for the whole of humanity, in harmony with nature itself? What's that? Utopian, you say? Too idealistic? Communist? Well, I don't know about you, But when I stumble around this planet we call home, a system condition that demands one thing to ensure the prosperity of the human family: adaptation, I'm at once impressed at our tremendous accomplishments as a species, and at once horrified at the ignorant failures, mostly resulting from a refusal to see the earth as one system design and humanity as one family bound within. So as this season finale of Culture in Decline will argue, humanity is being faced with a choice, a fork in the road. And it is my personal conviction that the broad social decisions made this generation might very well be what makes or breaks our species in the long run. And perhaps, by the end of this episode, you, like me, will feel the need to think about which path we should choose: a culture in ascent or a culture in decline. Science fiction writers, scientists, and so-called futurists of the world have painted many pictures of what the future may hold. Some are modest, positive, or even utopian. Some are dystopian, dark, and oppressive. As far as the probable truth, the best we can do is measure the trends and average out the projections, with perhaps, of course, the most relevant trend being the influence of science and technology. Of course, technological progress has its culture lag, right? However, today, doesn't it seem like the gap between our scientific advancement and our actual understanding and consideration of that advancement is growing wider and wider? Doesn't it seem a little bit obvious that technological capacity is exceeding social maturity? It's actually a frightening point, in truth, as it's a cultural value issue. Science and technology put into the hands of forward-thinking developers who perhaps recognize the profound capacity to create an abundance, stabilize our ecological influence, and become sustainable both environmentally and culturally, tend to view the world very differently than the more common market, nationalist, elitist mindset, which sees society through the filter of narrow self-interest and competition, constantly reinforcing that gain at the expense of others is a law of nature, and hence a virtue to be praised and rewarded. In this context, we might see how those same tools will be used to make bigger weapons, more surveillance technology, and ever stronger physical and psychological prisons for the vast majority of humanity, to remain in servitude to a small group of people in essentially the ownership class. So with that in mind, I present to you a thought exercise. Using my fresh new time machine here, I'm going to be your guide on a trip to two possible futures. First, we will visit a world that just may be if the current social, ecological, and technical patterns persist as they are. Then we will visit a possible future that very well could be if we as a species were willing to simply employ our vast potential to forge a new, highly efficient societal design with new practices. A design which is not utopian or idealistic, but rather quite simple, practical, and doable, if we simply made the decision to change in accord with the logic of our natural existence.
It's Culture in Decline.
New York City, 2110. It's been a while since the fall of the U.S. empire, and by extension, the general decline of much of the world. The massive influence of U.S. economic policy, along with the corresponding materialistic, inefficient, and wasteful values born out of the consumption-based growth economy, began to reach its physical limits in the mid-21st century. Until that point, the race towards global industrialization continued unabated, with the world still pining for the so-called American dream, not computing that if the entire world acted with the same waste patterns as the U.S., we would have needed 4 more Earths worth of resources just to keep it all going. What happened? Well, there were 3 nails in the coffin of societal collapse. The synergy of these issues compounded each other into a vicious storm, and by the time the Earth hit a population of 8 billion, right before the Third World War, global unemployment reached levels of 65%, every government on Earth was bankrupt to each other, and the core hydrocarbon energy sources saw destabilizing scarcity. And while China did win the war, what resolution was achieved didn't last long. The cancer and health epidemics alone in Asia and beyond rose to catastrophic proportions, with 1/3 of the planet still uninhabitable today due to industrial pollution. Today, the global population has fallen by 40% due to scarcity and disease. As far as the energy crisis, the early 21st century made tremendous progress in understanding renewable, sustainable energy systems. We were learning on paper how to stop our use of inherently scarce, polluting energy stores in the earth, realizing the almost unlimited abundance of our regenerative universe, and energy income that could provide for everyone many times over if we only moved fast enough to create the proper infrastructure. Unfortunately, such a transition attempt was met with great resistance by financial interests. You see, there was this thing called the free market, which was far from free, in truth. It was a war and elitist protection system, and the bigger and more profitable an industry became, the less financial incentive existed to alter it. Money was the goal of this game, not sustainability or efficiency. And the fact was, we needed to move fast, utilizing the remaining hydrocarbon resources to create new sustainable energy infrastructure. It was a race against global population increases and hence needs. And sadly, we failed, passing the point of no return, as once the true scarcity of our hydrocarbon resources became understood, social destabilization and panic rapidly commenced to further barricade. And what little progress did take place was rapidly destroyed thereafter by the water and energy wars. At the same time, the world faced the largest unemployment rates in history. Long considered a Luddite myth, the exponential increase in machine automation in the 21st century created a powerful acceleration of industrial productivity at ever cheaper rates, displacing workers more rapidly than technology could actually create new jobs. Forward thinkers saw a great shift in the architecture of society. Perhaps the ancient idea of earning a living could be replaced with living a life. We could see the new capacity to create an abundance to meet the needs of every human being on Earth, 8 billion and beyond. But sadly, this prospect met the same fate as our energy ambitions. The corporations, locked into a manner of thought which viewed mechanization as not a means for abundance, but rather a means to save even more money in the process of production, set up a violent clash. Not only a clash between workers and owners, but, ironically, a clash of system functions. For capitalism was faced with its most grand contradiction, where suddenly labor could exist with increasingly less human involvement, and hence the constant pursuit of cost efficiency for profit inevitably meant that less money would be put into circulation through wages, and so the system ran itself down into an ever-weakening slump. Noticing this, the cry of some was to stop mechanization, knowing the economy literally needed jobs by design. Others performed activism to try and convince the world that it was time to adapt, to simply give humanity what it needed, to bypass the market. Why should we invent more jobs to waste human life just to keep this system going? Yet, of course, they were bashed in the media, dismissed as socialist upstarts and freedom-hating communists, trying to corrupt the supposed liberty of what was nothing more than a religion, the all-seeing market. And by the time the corporate-controlled governments couldn't look the other way any longer, the momentum of anger and dismay was too much. The unions went on strike, and the cry for revolution exploded. The Luddites blamed technology for the problems, the businesses blamed government interference, the counterculture blamed idealized conspiracies, with few realizing that it was a system failure, a natural evolution of our culture which demanded respect and adaptation. And the third and perhaps most absurd of all social plagues was the illusion of financial debt. It's an interesting historical note that for some reason the mafia-style organized crime mode of the market was never really accepted as a legitimate consequence, when it was in fact a ruling ethos inherent in the competitive, scarcity-driven nature of the system. Centuries of denial can be found in the endless economic textbooks of this now failed model, saying that if any such behavior did occur, it was an anomaly, a corruption rather than a core characteristic expected of the system itself. Within this propensity, a debt system emerged. Whether structurally intended as a force of class warfare or not, the system served the elite quite well for a little while. Every form of currency produced was created out of debt and loaned at interest to the governments, businesses, and individuals. Yet, it was a mathematical impossibility for this debt to ever be repaid, as there was always more debt in the global economy than money to pay it back due to the profit mechanism of interest being charged. And while this allowed for a surplus of cheap labor that further divided the classes, moving from 1% owning 40% of the planet's wealth in the early 21st century to now 1% owning 70%, the viral nature of the mechanism got the best of everyone in the end. To expand the delusion, global banking institutions were then installed, to loan money made out of debt, again, to the now bankrupt countries, only to watch these world banks fail over time as well. It was the greatest inadvertent scam of all time, a pyramid scheme on steroids, destined to fail for all. And by the time of World War III, all the countries had defaulted to each other, and the global banking system collapsed. Of course, during these trials, the illusion of so-called democracy still persisted. Equally as religious and mythological in its understanding as the so-called free market, everyone turned to their representative government, a mafia constituency to be sure, intimately in bed with the corporate financial interests, which, by virtue of the ruling ethic of social and class warfare and competition, had little structural incentive to care about the vast majority of the world. And so it went. Not too pretty, huh? Well, while this future may be a little extreme in its presentation, keep in mind this is what the trends suggest. However, I think it's time we take a positive view of the future, one that's actually quite possible if we were intelligent enough to adjust accordingly. What the shit? Where am I? I must have dialed wrong. Oh wait, we went in the past to the 2013 Zeitgeist Media Festival. Sweet. Oh, and there's Kelly Mays doing her thing.
If we do these things when the tree is green, oh please, what will happen when it dies? I create and know somewhere deep in the unseen is the key that will open up our eyes. If we do these
So, what do you think the future is going to be like in, say, 100 years?
Well, I think we could go down two paths. The first would be that we continue to sort of build on top of this cancer consciousness separation, every human being for themselves kind of a thing. I don't necessarily like that idea. But I do think there's another direction that we could go. I would love to see people working together in community. I think we're missing the whole kind of tribal element. As Mouse would say, I would love everybody to live in tree houses. I mean, I really believe that we have the technology to deal with every imaginable problem on the earth. We have plants that can bioremediate, like sunflowers, for example. We have everything that's available to us to fix all of these problems, to create incredible abundance, to not have to deal with this ridiculously corrupt monetary system.
psychically in tune to the stars? We are already psychically in tune to the...
Ah, man, I hate to leave this sweet-ass festival. It really is amazing how the arts contribute to social development. And yes, life really should be a celebration, not a trial. But okay, let's get back to work. Los Angeles, 2110. What was once a sea of congested traffic and agitating urban sprawl in the early 21st century has been transformed into a model of efficiency and safety. The 9-to-5 workday tradition, which forced most of society to cram into gridlocked highways en route to a kind of covert slavery, is a distant memory of a new, highly advanced technological society. Contribution to society is no longer based on the narrow, selfish pursuit of personal gain. Money lost its use long ago as the foundational premise of its existence was outgrown. The culture finally realized that a basic, technical system of collaboration, sharing resources and ideas, would enable a highly abundant, sustainable, and stable world, unlike anything the market ethic of scarcity, competition, and class warfare could fathom. It was called the Great Transition, where the benefit of taking an Earth-wide system perspective, coupled with the application of basic physical and social science, set in motion a train of thought that transcended most everything we had considered normal in the early 21st century. And while it is far from perfect, the basic design to take care of everyone worked, while still structurally respecting the natural environment, unleashing a kind of human freedom and capacity for development never before seen. To understand how this new world emerged, we need to start by recognizing a trend which became apparent in the early 20th century. With humanity having spent the vast majority of existence under the veil of superstition, impending scarcity, and general elitism, the idea of not having enough to go around and the perpetuation of haves and have-nots appeared to be simply an immutable law of nature. War after war, genocide after genocide, it intuitively appeared that this was simply the way the human condition was to be. However, with the development of science and the notion of something called technical efficiency, a pattern began to emerge which set the stage for likely the most radical change in human societal operation in history. It was called ephemeralization, the ability to do more and more with less and less. As paradoxical as it may seem, our advancement in understanding how to use our planetary resources, in conjunction with the emerging laws of natural science, set in motion a pattern of conservation and efficiency where, over time, less and less materials, labor, and energy were needed to produce and execute more and more life-supporting processes. For example, the first computer built in the 1940s covered 1,800 square feet of floor space, weighed 30 tons, and consumed 160 kilowatts of electric power. Today, an inexpensive pocket-sized cell phone computes substantially faster, running on virtually nothing in comparison. Communication, which used to require enormous amounts of arduous copper wire to facilitate phone calls, has been replaced by lightweight satellites. Physical home construction, which took massive amounts of resources and labor, eventually evolved into using lightweight, prefabricated structures which could be assembled by automation using a fraction of the materials and labor as before, and yet were substantially stronger and durable. Even the core foundation of nutrition, agriculture, which, since the start of the Neolithic period, was bound to certain regions for certain climates and land propensities, saw a revolution in versatility, where soilless farming systems could provide organic food locally, without pesticides, using less fertilization, and with little energy wasted on transport. The very idea of globalization was a distant memory, along with the vast waste it created. In effect, no industry or sub-industry was amiss with this trend. Even labor itself, with the application of automation finally applied as the target means for production, exploded efficiency and capacity, with less and less human toil necessary over time. By the mid-21st century, even the idea of mass good production was also no more, as advancements in modular robotics and nanotechnology allowed for good production to exist on-site, on demand, in a kind of variety never before seen in capitalism. The idea of producing goods in mass and storing inventory was no more. In fact, most homes now had production rooms, which printed the basic clothes, household tools, and general needs right there on site. And on the efficiency grew, bringing the world into a condition of post-scarcity abundance, where, within the educational framework of natural law, respecting that there are indeed limits to growth and consumption, a new human values system emerged which gloried in its capacity to increase efficiency and maintain ecological balance and sustainability. Not only physical sustainability per se, but cultural sustainability. Taking care of everyone was not a poetic consequence. It was a core focus to create a form of earthly harmony unknown before. Of course, none of these transitions came easily. The market economy and those who profited most dogmatically tried to stop this advancement as the elitism they held dear was drawn into question. It took decades of activism and showing the world, including those of great power and wealth, that life could be much better for them as well, along with everyone else, and that the market system simply was incompatible with this new mode of optimized efficiency, an efficiency desperately needed to not only progress society, but save it. Oh, shit, I gotta get back. It's almost time for my favorite TV show.
Will you stop smacking my ass? Would you stop smacking my ass? You keep smacking my ass. You cray cray with that ass smacking. Stop the ass smack, cray cray smack ass.
Bitch. We now return to Free Market Fun Sack.
Welcome back to Free Market Fun Sack, the game that tests your understanding of the global economy and reminds us that true freedom is our ability to restrict the freedom of others. We're now in our final action round with the remaining categories. Those wacky Austrians, What Mafia, Fuck You and Your College Dream, and Gimme Gimme Gimme, Mine Mine Mine. Tammy, it's your turn.
Sam, I'll take fuck you and your college dream for 300, please.
Currently, in the United States, which form of indirect slavery is most actively saving the ownership class by generating legions of young, desperate laborers? Tim?
Sam, that would be debt slavery.
That's correct, Tim. In fact, there's now about $1.2 trillion in student debt alone. An excellent career motivator, to be sure. Tim, you're up.
I'll take What Mafia for 400, please.
Which free market-induced cartel currently maintains the most oppressive power over life-improving public health policies? Tammy?
The Federal Reserve.
Close, but no. Fred?
The Food and Drug Administration.
There we go. That's right, folks. We do have cures for cancer. Too bad it would interfere with the bottom line of the existing medical mafia. Fred?
Yeah, Sam, I'll take Gimme 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 Mine 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 for 600.
Which continent has been most capitalized upon for its natural resources and cost-efficient labor since the start of the British Empire? Fred?
Asia?
Very close, but no. Tammy?
South America?
Even closer, but no bueno. Tim?
Africa.
You got it. Oil, minerals, spices, land, and even people have been taken by the West and put to good economic work for hundreds of years. Economic efficiency at its best. That buzzer means we're out of time. Fred, you're our new winner. Tammy and Tim, please enter your designated free market fun sacks, as your fates have been set to help contribute to the emerging market economies of the third world. Ed?
That's right, Sam. Tammy is off to luscious Thailand to be a sex slave in one of the most promising markets of the region, human trafficking. While Tim is off to Southeast Asia to work for 18 hours a day for 10 cents an hour, making expensive sneakers for American school children.
Thank you all for joining us. Now a word from our sponsor.
Most people have no idea that golf was invented by Alphonse Leggert, whose glass eye popped out in the park when he sneezed too hard. Because of his broken leg, he had to putt the eye all the way home before his wife retrieved it for him. But by then, he knew he had a new sport and a dream. It's all true. Know why? Because you heard it from some guy in a tie.
Final thoughts. I've spent the beginning of my focus in activism by doing what most everyone else was doing. Blaming other people and institutions. Don't like the war? Let's blame the president, Congress, or political lobbyists. Don't like ecological disregard? Let's blame this or that corrupt corporation or some regulatory body for poor performance. Don't like being poor and socially immobile? Let's blame government coercion and interference in this free market utopia everyone keeps talking about. The sobering truth of the matter is that the only thing to blame is the dynamic, causal unfolding of system expression itself on the cultural level. In other words, none of us create or do anything in isolation. It's impossible. We are system-bound, both physically and psychologically, a continuum. Therefore, our view of causality with respect to societal change can only be truly productive if we seek and source the most relevant sociological influences we can and begin to alter those effects from the root causes. And I don't know about you, but I am so sick of listening to 95% of the world's media, social critics, political parties, economic philosophers, so-called scientists, and yes, activist communities, as they continue wasting time and energy trying to patch a sinking ship that never had structural integrity to begin with. It isn't to say that we don't need such patches, okay? Because we are truly hemorrhaging from our wounds. But the level of embarrassment now upon us with respect to the hamster wheel of pointless acts must truly make for one hell of a reality show for the possible aliens watching our rather idiotic planet orbit into oblivion. The late great George Carlin once said, "When you are born on this planet, you are given a ticket to the freak show. And if you're born in America, you are given a front row seat." It may be true that behind every cynic there is a failed idealist, but in a world where no good deed goes unpunished, it is easy to see how the most sensitive of the human condition can't help but suffer a kind of trauma of the spirit, where the childlike goodwill, curiosity, and rational development is stomped, suppressed, and destroyed by a stubborn traditionalism forged by the supposed virtue of arrogant elitism. And yes, if you haven't figured it out, at the root of this series is not a light satirical view of modern life. It is a deeply frustrated and agitated expression that furthers in part my personal cathartic attempt to ward off the condition of simply not giving a shit anymore. And my hope is that those of you out there who can identify with this plight will begin to understand the seriousness of this societal struggle and work to help redeem this epidemic of intellectual belligerence known as the zeitgeist we endure. With that, I would like to thank all of you who have supported this show thus far, and perhaps we all may emerge to see a common human end in time, realizing that everything is you and you are everything. A spiritual responsibility of sorts, if you will, perhaps finally lifting us out of the dark age we wallow in today. My name is Peter Joseph, and perhaps you, like me, will no longer perceive yourself as a victim of a culture in decline, but rather as an agent of evolution, an agent of a culture in ascent.
The Pentagon has implemented its new strategy for global presence, Total Awareness Military Protocol Operational Network.